As the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows of night stretched long across the land, the world transformed. It was during these hours of darkness that the unknown crept in, an ancient, silent force that few dared to acknowledge, yet all feared. For the villagers who lived in the folds of forgotten valleys or nestled in the shadows of towering mountains, nightfall brought more than just the absence of light. It was a time of peril, a time when the fabric between the living and the spirit world thinned to a fragile, almost imperceptible veil. Ancient cultures across the globe understood this truth, though few spoke of it aloud. What they knew, and what they feared, was that the night was not merely a blanket of sleep, but a doorway. The darkness held not only the mysteries of the earth, but also those of the unseen. Spirits, both benevolent and malevolent, wandered freely when the world slept. They whispered across the land, their forms too elusive for the human eye to see. But their presence was deeply felt, an oppressive weight on the soul, a shiver down the spine. But for those who knew, those who lived by ancient wisdom, this knowledge wasn't just something to fear, it was something to protect against. For centuries, rituals were quietly passed from generation to generation, rituals so secretive, so shrouded in mystery, that even the most inquisitive eyes dared not look too deeply. These ceremonies were never meant for the outside world. They were not to be shared with strangers or outsiders who could not understand their power. In fact, they were often hidden in plain sight, buried beneath the dust of time, so that their true meaning could never be fully revealed. What did these villagers do when the moon rose high and the world seemed still? They prepared for the darkness that threatened to consume them. They lit sacred fires, whispered incantations known only to a select few, and performed rituals that connected them to forces unseen. These were not simply ceremonies of superstition, they were survival. The very act of participating in these rituals was an act of spiritual defense, a shield raised against the unknown, against the forces that existed just beyond the edge of reality. But even as they practiced these sacred rites, they knew that not everyone was welcome to understand. The knowledge was hidden, deliberately erased by those who sought to control the flow of information, the flow of belief. It became a secret passed down through whispers in the dark, etched into the memory of those who believed. The rituals, though simple in their outward appearance, were profound in their intent. They were more than just protection. They were a connection to something far older, far deeper, a link between the living and the dead, between the world of man and the world of spirit. In the silence of the night, villagers gathered in hidden places to perform these rites, to safeguard their souls. These rituals were not without risk. There were those who did not understand, those who feared the power such knowledge held. And yet, the villagers persisted, driven by the same ancient fear that had guided their ancestors, whispering from the shadows of time. What secrets did these ceremonies hold? What knowledge did they keep hidden from the world's gaze? And more importantly, what did they protect against? These are the questions that have remained unanswered for centuries, buried in the silence of the night. But as the shadows of the past stretch into the present, the veil begins to lift, revealing the forbidden knowledge that was once lost. As we begin to peer into the depths of these ancient mysteries, we will uncover the forgotten ceremonies and the secrets they guarded. The truth may not be as simple as it seems, and what we find may not only protect our souls, but change the way we see the world forever. As the sun faded beneath the horizon, darkness would creep across the land like a silent predator, swallowing the world in its shadow. For the villagers of ancient times, this was no simple passing of day into night. The falling of the sun marked the beginning of a time that was feared not because of the absence of light, but because of what might emerge from that very absence. Darkness was not just the natural cycle of the world, it was a doorway, a gateway to another realm, a realm where the veil between the living and the dead grew thin, and where the forces of the unseen could slip through into their world. In many cultures, the night was seen as a perilous time, when spirits roamed freely. Not just any spirits, but those with darker intentions. Demons, shadows, malevolent forces, these were the things that could invade the quiet corners of homes, the dark forests, and the fields where the villagers worked. It was said that the spirits of the dead, neither at peace nor fully departed, wandered the earth at night, seeking to possess, mislead, or even harm the living. These ancient beliefs cast the night in an eerie light, one that left the villagers constantly on edge, knowing that when darkness fell, they were not only vulnerable but exposed to unseen threats. To the villagers, the very fabric of the world seemed to tremble at night. The earth, the squaffum, and the unseen forces that touched both were in constant flux. There was a belief that when the sun set, the world's protective barriers weakened, allowing these spirits, these dark entities, to move freely among them. This belief was not limited to one culture or one village. From the far-flung corners of Europe to the remote islands of the Pacific, ancient cultures shared a common fear, that the darkness was alive with danger. It wasn't simply a time for sleep, but a time when protection was most urgently needed. And so, the villagers devised methods to shield themselves from the night's encroaching terror. Rituals, chants, and protective charms were created, each carefully crafted to keep the darkness at bay. These were not mere superstitions. They were born from a deep understanding of the world's unseen dangers, passed down from ancestors who had learned, often the hard way, that the night was not simply empty space. It was a time when spiritual boundaries were blurred, when forces from beyond could slip through and take hold of the living. For the villagers, the fear of the unknown was ever present. What they could not see, what they could not fully understand, was often their greatest threat. And darkness, with its ability to hide both the familiar and the foreign, was the perfect vessel for these unknown forces. It is said that the night could consume a person's soul, stripping them of their life force, leaving them lost and wandering. This was not a simple belief. It was a deep, primal fear rooted in the very fabric of their spiritual understanding. To be consumed by the night was to be stripped of one's essence, one's identity, leaving the body a shell, hollowed out by the unseen forces lurking in the dark. The ancient villagers, aware of this danger, would gather in secret, performing sacred rituals that had been passed down through the ages. These ceremonies were designed not only to ward off the spirits of the night, but also to restore balance, to ensure the protection of the soul. The rituals themselves were varied. Some used fire to ward off the darkness, others relied on sacred words and incantations that had the power to close the door between the living and the dead. These rituals, while seeming strange to modern eyes, were imbued with a deep spiritual significance that the villagers took very seriously. To them, these rites were not optional. They were vital. Their very lives, their very souls depended on them. But why did they trust these midnight rituals to protect them? What made these ceremonies so powerful in their eyes? The answer lies in the belief that darkness, with its unseen forces, could never be fully understood. But through these rituals, they could create a protective barrier, a spiritual shield strong enough to keep the darkness from taking hold. The rituals were not just acts of superstition, they were acts of survival designed to keep the villagers safe in a world that, after nightfall, became far more dangerous than it seemed. As we begin to uncover the details of these ancient practices, we will see that these midnight rituals were not simply born from fear. They were born from a deep spiritual understanding of the world's unseen forces and the belief that certain knowledge, when passed down through generations, had the power to ward off the darkness. These were not just practices, they were lifelines, and we will soon dive into the very heart of the ceremonies that protected the villagers from the consuming power of the night. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the night's cold fingers reached across the land, the villagers would prepare. It was not a matter of superstition, but survival. They had learned over centuries that the night brought with it more than darkness. It brought spirits, some benevolent, some malevolent, and the thin veil between the physical world and the spiritual realm seemed to stretch and tear with each passing hour of darkness. To face the night unprepared was to risk one's soul, to invite in forces that could consume you without a trace. And so, every evening, these rituals would unfold, cloaked in secrecy and sacredness. In the heart of the village, where the fires burned low and the air grew heavy with the scent of earth and smoke, the villagers would gather. In the shadows of their homes, they whispered words that had been passed down through generations, chants older than the soil they walked on. They were simple words to some, but to the villagers, They were a lifeline. The chants were believed to ward off evil spirits that roamed the earth at night, demons who could slip through the cracks in the veil. Each word spoken was like a thread, weaving a protective web around the home, around the family, around the soul. But these chants were not the only defense. The villagers knew that darkness was a multifaceted threat, one that could not be defeated with mere words alone. They relied on the power of the earth itself, using herbs, roots, and oils to shield themselves from the malevolent forces of the night. Sage, rosemary, and thyme. These were not just herbs to season food, but sacred plants used in ritual. Sprigs of rosemary were hung over doorways, while bundles of sage were burned to purify the air, their smoke rising into the heavens, carrying with it the hopes of the villagers for protection. The pungent aroma of these herbs filled the air as they were burned, creating an invisible barrier that only the initiated could understand. The smell was both comforting and fierce, a reminder that protection was not given lightly, but earned. In the center of the home, near the hearth where the flames flickered and danced, a simple but powerful ritual would take place. The villagers would form a circle, their hands joined in solidarity, eyes focused on the fire. Benevolent spirits, they believed, watched over them from the other side. Offerings would be placed in the fire, small tokens of gratitude, food, or flowers. As the flames consumed the offerings, the villagers would bow their heads, their lips moving in quiet prayer. It was believed that these spirits, when honored, would offer their protection, guiding the villagers through the night's dangers. The offerings were made not out of greed or fear, but as a sign of respect, a way to maintain the balance between the living and the spirit world. Outside, at the boundaries of the village, additional layers of protection would be set in place. Salt would be scattered in a circle around homes, sprinkled at doorways and windowsills, believed to keep out spirits and evil entities. Salt was thought to be a powerful purifier, a substance that could cleanse and protect. It was an ancient belief that salt could not only ward off evil, but could banish the darkness itself. The villagers knew that the physical world and the spirit world were forever intertwined, and to truly safeguard their lives and their souls, they had to establish boundaries, boundaries that both the living and the dead would respect. But these ceremonies, though protective, were not without their dangers. The villagers knew that performing the rituals incorrectly could invite disaster. One misstep, one unspoken word, could open the door to something far worse than they ever feared. The rituals had to be performed exactly as prescribed, for only then would they hold the full weight of their protective power. The elders of the village, those who had learned from the ancients, were the keepers of this sacred knowledge. They were the ones who guided the villagers through the dark nights, ensuring that the rituals were carried out with precision. The older generations would often sit quietly, watching over the young ones, guiding them with their steady hands and ancient wisdom. They were the last line of defense between the living and the dark forces that waited just beyond the veil. But how did the villagers conduct these ceremonies in secret? How did they ensure that this ancient knowledge, this power, was passed down without falling into the wrong hands? The answer lies in the very nature of the rituals themselves. These practices were shrouded in mystery, deliberately kept from outsiders, and often spoken of only in whispers. The villagers knew that their protection relied not only on the rituals, but on their secrecy. To reveal the details to outsiders was to risk exposure to forces that could never be controlled. These ceremonies, passed down from generation to generation, were known only to a select few, those who had proven themselves worthy of the knowledge. The secret was their greatest protection. And yet, despite the secrecy, despite the layers of protection and caution, there were always those who sought to uncover these forbidden practices. Some came with curiosity, others with a desire for power. But the villagers, with their centuries-old wisdom, understood the risks of sharing these secrets with the wrong people. It wasn't just the spirits they feared, it was the misuse of knowledge itself. What ancient knowledge kept them safe from the darkness? Was it the chants, the herbs, or the boundary they set around their homes? Or was it something deeper, something more primal, that connected them to forces older than the land itself? And these questions have echoed through time, and as we unravel these ancient practices, we must also ask, Are these rituals truly lost to time, or do they still influence spiritual practices today? As we uncover the truth behind these secret ceremonies, we will begin to understand how this forgotten knowledge might still shape the way we protect ourselves from the darkness that lingers just beyond the edge of our awareness. As the stars began to blanket the sky and the last traces of sunlight disappeared, the villagers gathered once again, preparing for another night steeped in ritual. To an outsider, it might have seemed like superstition, a series of meaningless gestures meant to ward off imaginary threats. But for the villagers, these midnight ceremonies were not simply about keeping evil spirits at bay. There was something far deeper at play. These rituals were not just about protecting the body. They were about ensuring the survival of the soul. At the heart of the villagers' belief system was the understanding that life and death were not as separate as they seemed. They believed that death was not an end, but a transition, and that the afterlife was a realm just as real as the world they inhabited. But this belief came with its own dangers. The line between life and death, they knew, was fragile. Death was not a finality, it was a threshold. And just as some souls peacefully crossed into the next realm, others lingered, restless spirits that wandered in search of something. It was these spirits, those not at peace, that the villagers feared the most. These were the souls that could come back from the dead, either out of malice or a deep, unfulfilled longing to claim the living. The rituals the villagers performed were designed to protect their souls from this very fate. They believed that the darkness of night was a time when the barrier between the living and the dead was weakest, when spirits could slip through the cracks and enter the world of the living. The ceremonies, performed with meticulous care, were intended to create a spiritual barrier between the living and the dead, a way to ensure that the souls of the villagers remained safe. These rituals, while often cloaked in secrecy, were built on the villagers' deep understanding of spiritual balance. It was not enough to merely ward off malevolent spirits. The ceremonies were meant to preserve harmony between the realms. One of the core beliefs was that the soul, like the body, could be weakened or even consumed by forces from the other side. These spiritual forces could attach themselves to the living, gradually draining their vitality, leaving them vulnerable to illness, misfortune, or worse, possession. To prevent this, the villagers enacted rituals designed to seal their souls, protecting them from these encroaching spirits. Often, they would create protective symbols, drawn with chalk or ash around their homes. These symbols were believed to act as shields, wards that could repel any negative energy trying to enter. But these rituals were not just about safeguarding the individual. They were also about restoring balance, about resetting the spiritual energy that had been disrupted by death or the presence of restless souls. One of the most common practices involved crossing boundaries, literally and figuratively. Villagers would often mark physical boundaries around their homes, sometimes with salt, sometimes with stones, creating a protective barrier that no spirit could cross. But there was also a symbolic crossing, an inward journey that mirrored the boundary between life and death itself. It was said that through these actions, the villagers could reset their own spiritual energy, recalibrating their souls so they would remain untouched by the forces beyond. Through these ceremonies, the villagers also sought something more: protection for the future. The rituals were not just an attempt to defend the living from the present dangers of the night. They were also an attempt to ensure their survival beyond this life. These practices were intimately tied to the belief in an afterlife, but they were not about securing a peaceful passage into that realm. Rather, they were about making sure that, when the time came, the soul would be strong enough to journey through the darkness, to avoid being lost or trapped by the spirits of the dead. In essence, these rituals were a form of soul preservation, creating a spiritual insurance policy for the afterlife. The villagers believed that the strength of the soul, the vitality of one's spirit, depended on how well they were able to maintain spiritual balance. To falter in this, whether by neglecting rituals, by allowing negative forces to enter, or by failing to maintain boundaries, was to risk spiritual decay. In many ways, these ceremonies were not just about survival, they were a way to live fully, to ensure that the soul remained strong and protected throughout life and beyond. But the most curious thing about these rituals, the thing that separated them from mere superstition, was that they were not just about protecting the individual. The villagers understood that their fate was tied to the community as a whole. If one person's soul was left unprotected, the imbalance could affect everyone. This collective responsibility is why the rituals were so deeply ingrained in their culture. It wasn't enough to protect oneself. The community as a whole had to ensure that the balance between life and death, the seen and the unseen, was preserved for all. What then was the true spiritual purpose behind these midnight rituals? Were they simply about warding off darkness? Or was something much deeper at work, something far more profound, something that could offer an understanding of life, death, and the spaces in between? These ceremonies were not simply about survival, they were about securing peace in both this life and the next, creating a harmonious connection between the living and the dead, between the physical and the spiritual. As we delve deeper into the rituals themselves, we will begin to uncover their hidden significance. These ceremonies were not just about keeping out spirits, they were about creating balance, ensuring that the soul remained intact and unscathed no matter the forces at play. The real mystery, perhaps, lies not in the actions performed, but in the underlying beliefs that gave rise to them, the beliefs that continue to shape spiritual practices to this day. In the next section, we will explore who guarded these ancient secrets and why such powerful knowledge was kept hidden from the world. Who were the keepers of these rituals, and how did they protect this sacred knowledge from those who would seek to misuse it? Throughout history, there have always been those who stood at the edges of society, entrusted with sacred knowledge that could protect, empower, or even transform the lives of others. These individuals, whether they were shamans, priests, spiritual guides, or occult leaders, were the keepers of secrets that could not be spoken of lightly. Their role was not just to maintain the physical well-being of their people, but to guard the spiritual health of the community. The knowledge they held was seen as dangerous, both to the uninitiated and to the world outside their secluded rituals. It was believed that such power, if mishandled, could bring calamity not only to the individual, but to the entire community. The ceremonies we have uncovered, those designed to protect the soul from darkness, were not meant to be shared with just anyone. In fact, many of the rituals were kept within very small circles of trusted individuals. These were the keepers of knowledge, those who were believed to be chosen by the spirits themselves. Their role was far greater than that of a mere practitioner. They were guardians of the spiritual fabric that held the community together. Without them, the entire balance between the living and the dead, between the material and spiritual worlds, would unravel. These guardians were often seen as intermediaries between the two realms, walking in both worlds at once. Shamans, for example, were not only spiritual leaders but were also thought to possess the ability to communicate with spirits, whether to seek guidance, to heal, or to protect the living from the encroaching forces of darkness. In many cultures, shamans were regarded with a mix of awe and fear, for their power to control the unseen forces was not understood by most. Their knowledge was passed down through generations, often through oral traditions, in secrecy. Their training was intense and lifelong. Only those who had shown a deep spiritual connection or had undergone trials, often marked by a spiritual initiation, were permitted to learn the sacred rituals. And yet, this secretive transmission of knowledge was not without its dangers. The keepers of the rituals had to be cautious. They understood that the world outside their communities, governments, invading forces, even rival spiritual factions, could not be trusted with such potent knowledge. If the secrets of these powerful ceremonies were to leak out, they could easily be corrupted, used for evil or personal gain. The keepers had a responsibility to ensure that the power of these rituals was not misused. To protect the knowledge, they often made sacrifices, both personal and spiritual, to keep the practices from falling into the wrong hands. In some cultures, these keepers were part of secret societies, groups that existed outside the reach of the common people and sometimes even outside the reach of traditional religious institutions. These societies operated in secrecy, often conducting their rites at night, hidden from the view of the general population. Only those who were initiated were allowed to witness or participate in the rituals. Membership was earned, not given, and those who joined were bound by oaths to protect the secrets of the ceremonies at all costs. These secret societies were often the last line of defense against the forces of darkness, ensuring that the sacred knowledge remained intact, untarnished, and unexploited. The methods they used to maintain the secrecy of their practices were diverse and elaborate. Some communities utilized complex codes of conduct, such as symbolic language or gestures, to ensure that only those within their circle could fully understand the meaning of the rituals. Others relied on the creation of sacred texts, known only to the initiated, that contained detailed instructions on the correct performance of the ceremonies. These texts were often kept hidden in remote locations, safeguarded by powerful charms or spells that ensured their protection from unauthorized access. In some cases, the guardians of the rituals were required to undergo trials that would prove their worthiness, ensuring they could handle the knowledge without falling prey to its dangers. But the secrecy did not come without its price. The keepers of the rituals lived with a constant awareness of the consequences that would unfold should their secrets be revealed. They were often seen as outsiders, mistrusted by those who did not understand their role. And even within their own communities, there were those who questioned the validity of their power, who feared that the knowledge they guarded might not only be misused, but that the keepers themselves might become too powerful, too influential. In some cases, this fear led to betrayals, when the knowledge of these sacred practices leaked. Either through force or through the actions of a disloyal initiate, the results could be catastrophic. There were times in history when these secrets were almost lost to the world. In moments of invasion, warfare, or societal upheaval, the keepers had to decide whether to preserve the rituals or let them go, sometimes even at the expense of their lives. In some cases, entire communities were wiped out, their sacred knowledge lost forever, while in others, the keepers chose to pass on the knowledge to a select few, ensuring that the secrets would survive, hidden in plain sight. The keeper's role was not just a duty, it was a way of life. They believed their actions were part of a cosmic balance, a delicate dance between the seen and the unseen. Their task was not just to preserve the spiritual health of the community in the present, but to ensure that the wisdom of their ancestors would survive for future generations. They were the last line of defense against the unknown, and they took that responsibility very seriously. But what happens when these secrets begin to leak? The consequences are not always immediately visible. The world outside the sacred circles often sees only what it wants to see: distorted versions of ancient practices, misunderstood rituals, and stories that have become legend over time. Yet, when the secrets begin to unravel, the very fabric of the protection they offered begins to weaken. Those who seek power, those who wish to exploit the ancient knowledge, may twist it, corrupting the rituals in ways the keepers never intended. The fragile barrier between the living and the dead can begin to crumble, allowing the darkness to spill over. The leaking of these secrets, whether through betrayal or external forces, often marks the beginning of the end for the guardians. What they kept hidden for so long can no longer be preserved, and the ancient practices they guarded so carefully may fade into history, leaving only faint traces behind. The danger of this knowledge, however, is that it doesn't always disappear completely. It can resurface in unexpected places, reshaped, repurposed, and sometimes even weaponized. As we continue to uncover the role of these secret guardians, we will explore the consequences of their failure to keep the knowledge safe. What happens when the ancient rituals that protected the soul are exposed to the world, and who, in the end, will be responsible for the fallout? But before we delve into the demise of these practices, we will first turn our attention to the significant shift in society, how the very world around these spiritual leaders began to change, forcing the rituals underground and eventually erasing them from the collective memory. For centuries, the ancient rituals that had kept the villagers' souls protected from the dark forces of the night were practiced in secret, passed down through whispers, and kept safe in the shadows. These ceremonies had been a cornerstone of spiritual life, providing a sense of security and connection to something larger than themselves. But as the world began to change, so too did the fate of these sacred rites. The first cracks in the foundation appeared with the rise of organized religions, which sought to reshape the spiritual landscape. Christianity, Islam, and other monotheistic religions spread across the world, bringing with them a new set of beliefs that rejected the old ways. The rituals that had once protected the villagers' souls were now seen as heretical, tools of the devil, or at best, mere superstition. Religious authorities wielding immense power began to demonize these ancient practices, branding them as dangerous and misguided. What had once been sacred and essential was now reduced to something filthy, something to be eradicated. The church and other religious institutions began actively seeking to suppress and replace these rites, pushing them further underground. It wasn't just religious leaders who played a role in the decline of these rituals. Political powers, too, had a vested interest in controlling the spiritual practices of their people. Kings, emperors, and rulers sought to centralize power, and the independent spiritual practices of the villagers posed a direct challenge to that authority. If people turned to these secret ceremonies, to shamans and spiritual guides, for protection rather than the state or the church, it undermined the centralized power structure. As a result, political leaders sought to eradicate the ancient rituals with as much vigor as the religious authorities. In some regions, this led to outright persecution. Those who still practiced these ceremonies were often branded as witches, heretics, or traitors. They were hunted down, their rituals destroyed, their knowledge erased. Stories of public executions, trials, and tortures became common. The Inquisition, for example, famously sought to purge Europe of what they deemed pagan practices, targeting those who held on to the old ways. Villagers were torn between the ancient knowledge they had inherited and the rising tide of religious and political pressure that sought to obliterate their traditions. In many cases, they had no choice but to abandon the rituals or risk losing everything. The whispers of the old rituals began to fade. What had once been performed openly in the quiet of the night now moved behind closed doors, in secrecy and fear. The ceremonies that had once formed the backbone of the villagers' spiritual survival became hidden knowledge, locked away in the memories of the few who still dared to practice them. But even these guardians of the ancient rites faced increasing pressure. They could no longer gather in the open. They could no longer pass their knowledge freely. As time went on, these rituals, once a common thread through many cultures, were slowly erased from history, replaced by new religious dogmas and political ideologies. But the decline of these rituals didn't happen overnight. Historical records show that it was a slow and deliberate process. Some communities clung to the old ways for centuries, even as the world around them changed. They adapted the ceremonies, reshaping them to fit within the framework of the new religious and political systems. In some cases, elements of the ancient rituals were incorporated into new religious practices disguised as Christian saints or Islamic prayers. Yet, these hybrid forms could never fully replace the original practices. The essence of the ceremonies, the deep spiritual connection to the forces of the unseen, the boundary between life and death, was lost in the process. The tension between old and new continued to simmer beneath the surface, and for many, the rituals that had once provided protection were pushed deeper into the recesses of society. Where once they had been a shared cultural experience, now they became the secret knowledge of a few, passed down in whispers, hidden from the eyes of outsiders. In some cases, the rituals were so successfully suppressed that even those who had once practiced them forgot their meaning. What had once been an essential part of daily life was now relegated to the realm of myth and legend, remembered only in stories and half-forgotten rituals. But were these practices truly lost to history, or did they simply evolve into something else? The line between the old and the new is not always so clear. As we delve deeper into the story of these rituals, we must ask ourselves whether these ancient practices really disappeared, or if they merely adapted and survived in a different form, disguised by the shifting sands of time. Did they hide in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to resurface? Or perhaps, have they influenced the spiritual practices we know today in ways that we don't even realize? The next chapter will turn its gaze toward the present day, asking whether any remnants of these ancient practices have survived. In a world of technology, modern spirituality, and New Age beliefs, can the echoes of the old rituals still be heard? And if so, how do these ancient practices continue to shape the way we view the world and our place in it? The secrets may not have vanished completely. They may simply be waiting to be rediscovered. The rise of organized religions, particularly Christianity and Islam, marked one of the most significant shifts in human history. As these powerful faiths spread across the globe, they began to reshape the spiritual landscape, imposing new beliefs and practices while actively dismantling the old. The ancient rituals, once a vital part of daily life and spiritual survival, were branded as pagan, heretical, or even demonic. What had once been seen as essential forms of protection against the forces of darkness became synonymous with superstition and barbarism. For centuries, these monotheistic religions systematically worked to replace the old spiritual practices with their own rigid systems of belief, often through coercion, manipulation, and force. The villagers who once relied on sacred nighttime rituals, those deep, mysterious ceremonies that had been passed down through generations, were suddenly faced with an impossible choice. On one hand, they had their centuries-old beliefs, their sacred customs, their connection to the world of spirits and ancestors. On the other, there were powerful religious authorities promising salvation, unity, and protection from evil through a new and foreign set of rites. What was once familiar and comforting, these ancient spiritual practices, was now under threat, labeled as sinful, barbaric, and dangerous. Christianity's rise in Europe is perhaps one of the clearest examples of how organized religion sought to suppress these older practices. The Christian Church, in its efforts to convert pagan populations, labeled many ancient rituals as demonic. The powerful connection that people had to the land, to nature, and to their ancestors was now seen as paganism, and the ceremonies they performed to protect themselves from the spirits of the night were considered acts of heresy. Rather than seeing the rituals as a necessary part of spiritual life, the church condemned them. The old gods and spirits were demonized, and anything associated with them became suspect. The process of conversion was slow and brutal. Villages were razed, the sacred shrines and altars of the old religions destroyed, and practitioners of the ancient rituals were often burned at the stake or tortured into submission. For many, accepting Christianity was not simply a matter of faith, it was a matter of survival. The choice was stark: abandon the old ways or face persecution, perhaps even death. The villagers were caught between the comfort of their traditions and the overwhelming force of the church's New World Order. Over time, the old spiritual practices were driven underground, their practitioners silenced or eliminated. But Christianity wasn't the only force at play. As Islam spread through the Middle East and parts of Africa, the same pattern emerged. The ancient rituals, many of which involved communing with spirits, making offerings, and seeking protection from dark forces, were deemed as incompatible with the strict monotheistic teachings of Islam. In regions where Islam took hold, the traditional spiritual practices of the indigenous populations were either absorbed into Islamic practices or were repressed and eradicated. The belief in a vast spiritual world, populated by both benevolent and malevolent forces, was replaced with the singular focus on Allah as the one and only God, and all forms of spiritual interaction outside of that paradigm were seen as misguided or evil. In some cases, rather than completely eradicating these practices, organized religions would attempt to co-opt them. In parts of Europe, as Christianity spread, local traditions, symbols, and ceremonies were rebranded and reinterpreted to fit the new Christian framework. Pagan festivals were renamed, and the old gods were reimagined as saints. But even with this adaptation, the core of the ancient practices, the rituals designed to protect the soul from the forces of darkness, was lost. The connection to nature, to the land, and to the spiritual world beyond was severed. The villagers could no longer perform their rituals openly, and what remained of the old ways was often passed down in secrecy, hidden away from the prying eyes of religious authorities. The destruction of these ancient practices was not just a religious affair, it was deeply political as well. Rulers and monarchs, especially in Europe, aligned themselves with the growing power of the church. By supporting Christianity, they gained control over their subjects, consolidating both political and religious power. These rulers saw the spread of Christianity as a means to unify their people, to create a single belief system that could be easily controlled. The old boys, with their decentralized nature and independent spiritual leaders, posed a threat to this new order. As a result, monarchs and political leaders supported the church in its efforts to suppress these ancient practices. In many regions, this led to an all-out cultural shift. The ancient spiritual traditions were not only relegated to the margins, they were often criminalized. Secret societies formed in the shadows to keep the rituals alive. But the practice of spiritual protection was no longer a shared community experience. It became something hidden, something dangerous. This suppression continued for centuries, with little regard for the cultural and spiritual damage it caused. The ancient knowledge, once vital and open, became a guarded secret, passed down in whispers and coded symbols, often lost to all but the most determined seekers. As Christianity and Islam spread across the globe, the rituals of the night, the ceremonies that protected the villagers' souls, were erased from the collective memory of society. They became part of history, misunderstood, maligned, and forgotten. For those who still held on to the old ways, it became a matter of survival. The public practice of these rituals was replaced with private, clandestine ceremonies, and over time, the knowledge of how to perform these rites faded. The connection to the world of spirits, to the ancient forces that once walked the earth freely, was severed. The villagers' souls were no longer shielded by the ceremonies that had protected them for generations. But what if these spiritual practices were not truly eradicated? What if they simply evolved, adapted to a changing world? What if, in some small corners of the world, these rituals survived, hiding in plain sight? That question takes us into the next phase of this story, the remnants of these ancient practices and their survival in the modern world. In the next section, we will explore how political powers, monarchies, and governments continued to suppress and control spiritual practices, and how, even as society changed, the need for protection from darkness never truly disappeared. The rituals that had once been integral to survival were not forgotten. They were simply reinterpreted and transformed. The question now is, did the essence of these practices survive? And if so, how did they manifest in the modern world? As societies grew more centralized, the control over belief systems became a matter of both spiritual and political authority. Kings, emperors, and ruling elites realized that to maintain their power, they had to shape the beliefs and practices of their people. Spirituality, especially the ancient rituals that had connected people to their land, ancestors, and the unseen forces, was not just a private matter for individuals. It was a potent force that could unite people, inspire loyalty, and challenge authority. And in a world where rulers were often seen as divinely chosen, any independent spiritual practice that did not align with the state religion or monarch's control was seen as a threat to the existing power structure. The ancient ceremonies that had once been a vital source of strength for communities now became the focus of fierce suppression. What was once an intimate, personal form of protection, sacred rituals to safeguard the soul from darkness, was now branded as dangerous, subversive, or even heretical. The rituals that had long given people peace and security were erased, their power stripped away to prevent them from challenging the political order. This wasn't simply a matter of spiritual belief, it was about control. In an age when the church and state were intertwined, the authorities recognized that a populace that had access to independent spiritual practices could resist or defy centralized power. The first and most significant challenge came with the rise of the state church, where religious institutions became instruments of the state. In medieval Europe, the Christian church, with the support of monarchs, became the supreme authority over spiritual and political matters. No longer was religion a private relationship between the individual and the divine. Instead, it was a structured, centralized system that dictated how people should worship, when they should worship, and who they should worship. The rise of the state church meant that rituals not approved by the church were considered dangerous and unholy, and the ancient ceremonies were gradually driven underground. This political and religious alliance led to some of the most brutal crackdowns on spiritual practices. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the European Inquisition became one of the most notorious instruments of control. The Inquisition was not simply about religious purification. It was a campaign of political suppression. Those who continued to practice the old ways, paganism, witchcraft, or night ceremonies, were branded as enemies of the state and the church. Often these rituals were associated with rebellion against the Christian faith and the monarch's authority. Anyone found guilty of practicing them was subjected to torture, execution, or exile. The very act of performing ancient rituals became an act of defiance, a symbol of resistance to the oppressive powers that sought to control the spiritual lives of the people. For rulers, the idea that these ceremonies could pose a direct challenge to their authority was not far-fetched. Monarchs understood that people who maintained their own spiritual practices, especially those that connected them to the unseen world, were harder to control. Spiritual leaders who were not aligned with the state could become powerful figures of opposition, able to rally communities with promises of spiritual protection, salvation, or rebellion. By erasing or transforming these practices, rulers could ensure that their subjects' loyalty was solely directed toward the state and its religious institutions. The ancient rituals, once a lifeline for the community, became symbols of resistance to centralized control. In places like medieval Europe, the systematic suppression of these ceremonies reached its peak during the witch hunts. While many accused individuals were labeled witches and burned at the stake or drowned in public spectacles, the deeper political motive was clear. The rituals and knowledge associated with the witchcraft trials threatened the existing order. What had once been a secret and passed down through generations was now seen as an act of subversion. Women and men who knew the old who held knowledge of herbs, incantations, and spiritual rites, were targeted not only for their defiance of religious orthodoxy, but for their potential to disrupt the social and political hierarchy. The witch hunts were a concerted effort to rid the population of these ancient spiritual practices, forever burying them beneath the weight of fear and superstition. Across the ocean, in the New World, European colonists brought the same zeal to erase indigenous practices. The spiritual rituals of native peoples were not just seen as different, they were regarded as a threat to colonial control. Native ceremonies, which often centered around the land, the elements, and the spirits that resided in both, were labeled as savage and pagan. Colonizers sought to replace these practices with Christianity, forcibly converting indigenous populations and eradicating their cultural and spiritual traditions. In many cases, the rituals that had sustained entire communities for centuries were completely erased. The spiritual leaders of these indigenous groups, shamans, healers, and elders, were either killed, imprisoned, or forced to abandon their practices. Even when these rituals were not outright banned, they were often pushed so far underground that they became impossible to trace or preserve. In parts of Asia and Africa, where traditional belief systems were rooted in animism and ancestor worship, the imposition of monotheistic religions led to similar struggles. For example, during the spread of Islam across North Africa and parts of sub-Saharan Africa, indigenous spiritual practices were actively suppressed. Those who adhered to the old ways, performing rituals to honor ancestors or communicate with spirits, were often seen as impious or dangerous. In the context of expanding empires, such practices could undermine the unity of the empire. The rulers sought to control religious practice in order to maintain stability and power, ensuring that their subjects adhered to the dominant monotheistic faith. As powerful as these monotheistic systems were in stamping out ancient practices, they did not eradicate the deeply rooted spiritual yearnings of the people. Even under immense pressure, people continued to practice in secret. The rituals that once connected them to the divine, to their ancestors, and to the forces of the unseen world could not easily be erased from their hearts. These ancient spiritual practices became outlawed, hidden in whispers, and passed down through the shadows. So, what was the ultimate goal of the rulers and religious authorities who sought to erase these ancient rituals? It wasn't just about controlling spiritual life. It was about controlling the very essence of identity and survival. The rituals had been a means of protection, of balance, of connection to the past. By erasing them, these authorities stripped away the last remnants of individual spiritual autonomy. In the next section, we will look at how these practices survived in secret, quietly adapted and hidden from the world's eyes. They were not completely gone. They had simply become part of the unseen world, waiting for the day they could emerge once again. Despite the crushing weight of religious and political power, despite the persecutions, trials, and threats of death, the ancient rituals that once guarded the soul from the forces of darkness did not simply vanish. Instead, they slipped into the shadows, concealed beneath layers of secrecy, whispered in the hidden corners of the world. Where overt practice was impossible, covert survival became the key. The rituals, though outlawed, continued to endure, passed down in quiet defiance, preserved by those who understood their importance, but had no choice but to practice in the dark. In the face of constant suppression, some communities chose to preserve their spiritual traditions in secret. These clandestine practices became a form of resistance, a quiet rebellion against the forces that sought to erase them. They were adapted, sometimes subtly to avoid detection, transformed into seemingly harmless customs, or disguised as part of other, more accepted traditions. The rituals were no longer performed openly. They were hidden within the folds of folklore, tucked away in the pages of myth, veiled by layers of metaphor, so that only those who knew could recognize them for what they truly were. One of the most fascinating aspects of this survival was how these practices were passed down. With formal teachings outlawed, the knowledge was kept alive through oral traditions. Elders, those who had inherited the old ways, would share their knowledge in hushed voices, often only with trusted disciples. These teachings were not written down in books, but were instead conveyed through stories, parables, and symbols that carried the ancient wisdom. The oral transmission ensured that the rituals remained in the hands of the few, carefully preserved from prying eyes. This hidden survival didn't occur only in the isolated villages of Europe or the remote tribes of Africa. It was an underground current that flowed through all corners of the world. In Europe, the rise of secret societies played a pivotal role in keeping these ancient traditions alive. Groups like the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, and other mystical orders carried with them the remnants of these once sacred practices. While many of these groups outwardly professed to be part of the broader religious and political establishment, they secretly held on to the old knowledge. The rituals they practiced were often masked by symbolism, couched in layers of allegory and coded language. The initiation rites of these societies, while seemingly unrelated to the original spiritual ceremonies, echoed the ancient rites of protection, secrecy, and spiritual connection. The Freemasons, for example, were believed to possess secrets that dated back to the ancient builders of the great temples and sacred sites. These secrets were passed down through generations, hidden within their esoteric teachings and rituals. What began as a group of stonemasons, building temples to the gods, evolved into a covert society that kept the old spiritual practices alive. Their use of symbols, such as the square and compass, has long been understood to have spiritual significance, representing the balance between the material and spiritual worlds. The rituals performed in Masonic lodges were not only about building structures, they were about safeguarding spiritual truths, practices, and protections that had been passed down in secrecy. Similarly, the Rosicrucians, a mystical group that emerged in the early 17th century, claimed to possess hidden knowledge of the universe's deepest mysteries. While many of their practices appeared to be tied to alchemy, astrology, and medicine, they also reflected the ancient spiritual ceremonies that focused on protection and spiritual healing. The Rosicrucian manifestos, which circulated in Europe during this time, were a coded message meant to preserve ancient wisdom that could no longer be spoken openly. Their spiritual teachings, although veiled in secrecy, offered protection not only for the body but for the soul, ensuring that their members could navigate the unseen forces that still roam the earth. In the Americas, particularly in parts of Latin America and the Caribbean, the ancient spiritual practices of indigenous peoples survived by weaving themselves into the fabric of colonial religious practices. While Catholicism became the dominant religion, many indigenous communities continued to practice their traditional rituals in secret. In places like Haiti, these practices evolved into Vodou, a syncretic religion that blends African spiritual traditions with Catholicism. While the public face of Vodou was often misunderstood or demonized, at its core, It was a continuation of the ancient spiritual ceremonies meant to protect the soul and ensure balance with the forces of nature in the spiritual world. Similarly, in parts of Asia, the suppression of indigenous spiritual practices by both colonial powers and the rise of monotheistic religions led to the preservation of these traditions in secret. In many cases, rituals were hidden within the practices of Buddhism, Taoism, or Shinto, adapting to the cultural frameworks of the time while retaining their original purpose. For example, the ancient practices of animism, which focused on maintaining harmony with the natural world and its spirits, survived in many East Asian cultures by being incorporated into Buddhist or Taoist ceremonies. The rituals were still performed, but they were disguised within the broader religious context, ensuring their survival while avoiding the wrath of political or religious authorities. The need for secrecy didn't just stem from fear of persecution, it was also a matter of spiritual survival. The ancient rituals were believed to be so powerful that their misuse could lead to disaster. By keeping the ceremonies hidden from outsiders, these secret societies and underground practitioners ensured that the sacred knowledge was only accessible to those who could be trusted to use it responsibly. It was a balance between protecting the rituals and ensuring their continued transmission. Those who guarded these secrets knew that their survival depended on maintaining the integrity of the practices and preventing them from being diluted, twisted, or corrupted. This covert survival raises a fundamental question. Were these ancient ceremonies truly lost, or did they simply evolve into something else, disguised in new forms to protect them from being wiped out? In truth, many of these rituals did not vanish. They simply adapted to the changing times, concealed in plain sight, waiting for the day when the world might once again be ready to embrace them. These hidden practices, passed down through secret societies, mystical orders, and underground traditions, have left traces in the spiritual practices we see today. The question remains, how much of the ancient wisdom survives, veiled beneath layers of time, waiting to be rediscovered? As we continue our journey, we will uncover how these ancient spiritual practices have influenced modern spirituality and how remnants of these rituals may still echo in the practices of today. The survival of these ancient ceremonies may not be as mysterious as it seems. Rather, they may have simply adapted to new forms, slipping through the cracks of history to emerge in the present, transformed but still vital. The night has always been more than just a period of darkness. It has been a time of mystery, fear, and most importantly, transformation. For centuries, ancient civilizations performed secret rituals designed to protect their souls from the unseen forces that roam the earth when the sun set. But even as these ceremonies were suppressed or driven underground, their essence did not vanish. Instead, they were woven into the fabric of folklore and myth, transforming over time into stories that we tell ourselves, often without realizing the ancient spiritual truths that lie within them. In many cultures, the night was seen as a portal, a thin veil between the living and the dead. This belief continues to echo in folklore from around the world. Take, for example, the European concept of the witches' Sabbath, a dark and mysterious gathering believed to occur on the darkest nights of the year. The witches, often thought to possess the ability to communicate with spirits, would meet in secluded places, typically in forests or atop hills, to perform rituals that range from the casting of spells to communion with the dead. Although the witches' Sabbath, as portrayed in folklore, was often exaggerated and misunderstood, it reflects an ancient ritualistic practice that aimed to bridge the gap between the living and the spirit world. It was not merely about spell casting, as it is commonly thought today. It was a spiritual act designed to protect the soul, to commune with unseen forces, and to maintain balance between the material and spiritual realms. Similarly, the Japanese Obon festival, which marks the return of ancestral spirits, is another modern reflection of these ancient protective ceremonies. Obon, although it is celebrated as a joyous time, is rooted in the belief that the souls of the deceased return to visit their living relatives. Families light lanterns, offer food, and perform dances in honor of these spirits, hoping to appease them and ensure that they rest peacefully. The rituals of Obon, which have been passed down for generations, carry with them the essence of ancient practices, spiritual protections against malevolent forces, and a deep connection to the ancestors. It is a time when the veil between the living and the dead is believed to be at its thinnest, and these rituals were originally designed to protect the living from any harm that might arise from unsettled or vengeful spirits. In the Americas, ancient practices rooted in indigenous traditions still echo through various ceremonies that mark significant life events. Native American rites of passage, such as vision quests and ceremonies performed at the threshold of adulthood, continue to serve as a bridge to the spiritual world. While these rituals have evolved over time, their original purpose, to connect the soul to the greater spiritual forces of nature and the cosmos, remains intact. These ceremonies, particularly those performed at night, are designed not only to celebrate, but to protect. The initiates, often young men or women, were believed to commune with the spirit world during the night, receiving guidance and protection for their journey into adulthood. While these rituals are not always seen as protective in the modern sense, they still hold the spiritual weight of safeguarding the soul from the forces that lie beyond the visible world. What is striking about these modern iterations of ancient ceremonies is that, although they have been stripped of some of their original meanings and wrapped in the veil of myth and tradition, they still carry the essence of what they once were, rituals designed to protect and preserve the soul. They continue to embody the same themes, crossing boundaries, communing with the spiritual world, and ensuring protection against malevolent forces. The preservation of these ancient practices within folklore and mythology is no accident. The need to connect with the unseen, to protect the soul from the darkness, runs deep within human consciousness. These practices, once openly performed to safeguard the living from the spirits of the night, have survived in disguised forms, carefully hidden in stories and legends. Over time, the ritualistic elements have become dramatized, exaggerated, and mythologized, but the core of the ceremonies remains. For instance, many fairy tales, though seemingly innocent, are rooted in ancient beliefs about protecting the soul from dark forces. Take the story of Hansel and Gretel, for example. On the surface, it is a story about two children lost in the woods, but underneath lies an ancient archetype of the soul's journey through darkness, where the forest symbolizes the unknown, the threatening, and the malevolent. The witch who lives in the gingerbread house is not just a fairy tale villain, she is a representation of the dangers that lurk in the night, waiting to consume the soul of the unsuspecting. In ancient times, the figure of the witch was often associated with the knowledge of the spirit world, and the fear of being taken by her is symbolic of the fear of losing one's soul to the forces beyond. This symbolic survival of ancient rituals and folklore suggests that, despite the efforts to erase these practices, they are not so easily forgotten. They have endured, passed down through generations in the form of stories, myths, and symbols, waiting to be rediscovered by those who are willing to look beneath the surface. These rituals, once performed to ensure the safety of the soul, continue to resonate in our collective unconscious, reflected in the cultural traditions and folklore we still pass down today. The question, then, is not whether these rituals were truly lost, but rather how they evolved, adapted, and survived. In some cases, they may have been absorbed into larger religious or spiritual frameworks, their original meaning obscured but not entirely erased. In other cases, they have become part of popular culture, lingering in myths and legends, offering a glimpse into the ancient practices that once guided and protected the soul. As we delve further into the survival of these ancient practices, we will explore how they have manifested in modern spiritual movements. From modern-day witchcraft to New Age rituals, these ancient ceremonies continue to influence contemporary beliefs and practices. In the next section, we will uncover how these rituals have found new forms in the modern world, and how the desire for spiritual protection continues to resonate in the hearts of people today. The old ways have not disappeared. They have simply adapted, waiting for those who seek them out. In a world that often seems driven by logic, technology, and science, the resurgence of ancient spiritual practices may seem out of place. And yet, across the globe, a quiet revolution is taking place. Ancient rituals, once suppressed, hidden, or shrouded in secrecy, are finding their way back into the light. From moon rituals to solstice celebrations, the very practices that were once relegated to the shadows are now openly practiced by modern spiritual movements. These groups, ranging from neo-pagans to New Age practitioners and modern witches, are rediscovering and reintroducing elements of ancient ceremonies once thought to be lost forever. One of the most striking aspects of this revival is how contemporary spiritual movements have embraced the core principles of the ancient rituals. The desire to protect the soul and body from spiritual threats, the need to reconnect with nature and the divine, and the longing to preserve a sense of balance in an increasingly chaotic world. Modern witchcraft, neo-paganism, and New Age practices are often rooted in ancient traditions, but they have been reinterpreted to fit the needs and beliefs of today's spiritual seekers. Take, for example, the practice of moon rituals. In ancient times, the phases of the moon were seen as powerful spiritual markers, and ceremonies were performed to harness its energy. Full moon rituals were used to strengthen intentions, while new moons were times of reflection and renewal. In modern times, these practices have been revived by individuals and groups who seek to harness the same energies. On the night of the full moon, practitioners gather in circles, chanting, meditating, and performing rituals designed to cleanse and protect the soul. For many, it's not just about the moon's physical presence in the sky, but the ancient connection to the cyclical rhythms of nature. They seek to tap into the lunar energy to heal, manifest their desires, and cleanse their lives from negativity. In many cases, these moon rituals are not just about personal spiritual practices, they are part of a larger cultural movement. Modern witches and neo-pagans often celebrate the Wheel of the Year, a cycle of 8 festivals based on the solstices, equinoxes, and the midpoints between them. These celebrations, such as the winter solstice Yule or the summer solstice Letha, are a modern-day reflection of the ancient solstice celebrations that once honored the turning of the seasons and the balance of light and dark. The solstices, once times of spiritual reflection and connection to the Earth's cycles, are now celebrated as occasions for protection, renewal, and the honoring of ancient energies. Participants often perform rituals to safeguard themselves from the forces of darkness, just as their ancestors once did. For many modern-day practitioners, these rituals are not simply a way to honor the past. They are a form of protection in today's chaotic world. The rise of neo-paganism and New Age practices can be seen as a response to the increasing spiritual disconnection of modern society. People are seeking ways to protect their souls from the spiritual threats that have always existed, even if they are no longer recognizable as demons or malevolent spirits. In a world where mental health, emotional well-being, and personal empowerment have become central concerns, these ancient rituals are re-emerging as spiritual tools for protection and healing. Many of these modern spiritual groups are deeply committed to reviving the hidden knowledge of their ancestors. They often view their practices as a form of reclamation, reclaiming knowledge that was once suppressed or erased by external authorities. They see themselves as guardians of forgotten wisdom, carrying on the work of their ancestors while adapting the rituals for modern life. These groups argue that the ancient spiritual practices were designed not only for protection, but also for enlightenment, offering individuals a way to understand the deeper mysteries of existence. Through these rituals, practitioners seek to reconnect with the cosmic forces that once guided their ancestors, creating a spiritual connection that bridges the past with the present. The role of modern spiritual leaders in this revival is also crucial. These leaders, whether they are self-proclaimed witches, shamans, or spiritual guides, act as intermediaries between the ancient traditions and contemporary spiritual seekers. They are the ones who carry the knowledge of these ancient practices and help translate them for a modern audience. They provide the structure and guidance necessary to ensure that these rituals are performed correctly, preserving their potency and significance. Often these spiritual leaders emphasize the importance of community, urging their followers to come together and practice the rituals as a group, just as the ancient communities did. This sense of shared spiritual experience creates a bond between practitioners, helping them navigate the complexities of modern life while maintaining a connection to the spiritual practices of the past. But the revival of these ancient rituals is not without its challenges. As with any movement that seeks to resurrect long-forgotten knowledge, there is the risk of distortion. Some argue that the modern interpretations of these ancient practices may be diluted or commercialized, so losing their original intent. In a world where spirituality can sometimes be marketed and commodified, there is a fine line between preserving the sacred and turning it into a trend. Despite these challenges, however, the resurgence of these practices demonstrates a deep human need to reconnect with the spiritual world, to find meaning in the rituals that once guided our ancestors. What is most fascinating about this revival is how it reflects a broader desire to reclaim a sense of spiritual autonomy. In a world increasingly governed by technology and materialism, these ancient practices offer a way for individuals to take control of their spiritual well-being. They are no longer reliant on the institutions that once suppressed these rituals, but are instead creating their own paths to spiritual protection and enlightenment. As these rituals gain popularity, they are also evolving in ways that reflect the unique spiritual needs of modern practitioners. Whether it's through online communities, books, or social media, these practices are becoming more accessible, allowing individuals to participate in rituals that were once hidden from view. The ancient ceremonies of protection, once a secret passed down through whispers, are now being practiced openly, providing a sense of empowerment and connection to a deeper, more mystical world. The revival of these rituals speaks to a timeless human need, the desire to protect the soul from the unseen forces that linger in the darkness. As we continue to explore the modern adaptations of these ancient practices, we'll look at how these ceremonies fulfill the same emotional and spiritual needs that they once did, protecting, guiding, and empowering those who seek to reconnect with the mysteries of the past. And as we examine their significance today, we'll see how these ancient practices are not just relics of a forgotten past, but living traditions, waiting to guide the next generation of spiritual seekers. In today's rapidly changing world, where the familiar comforts of tradition often seem distant, many individuals find themselves searching for something that connects them to a deeper sense of security, a grounding force in times of uncertainty. These ancient night rituals, once performed in secret and often relegated to the realm of myth and folklore, still hold a deep resonance with people today. But why do these rituals, so steeped in the past, continue to offer protection and solace in modern times? What is it about these ancient practices that speaks to the human psyche, particularly in an era defined by technology, secularism, and a disconnect from nature? At the core of it all is the psychological need for protection. Whether it's protection from unseen forces, from external threats, or from the darker recesses of the mind, there is a profound desire within the human psyche to feel shielded from the unknown. This need is not just physical, but deeply emotional and spiritual. In a world filled with constant change, chaos, and complexity, many people feel adrift, disconnected from their ancestors, and often overwhelmed by life's challenges. The fear of the unknown, be it the unknown of the future, of death, or of spiritual forces that we can neither see nor control, has always been a part of the human condition. Ancient rituals were born out of a deep understanding of these fears. In societies long ago, the night was a time of heightened vulnerability, a time when the physical world seemed to fade into darkness and the boundaries between the living and the dead grew thin. These rituals were not just about warding off malevolent spirits. They were about creating a sense of psychological security, providing a means to cope with the existential fears that haunted people in the darkness. To perform these rituals was to take an active role in shaping one's own spiritual fate, to call upon forces that could protect, heal, and guide the soul. In modern times, these same ancient rituals continue to serve a similar purpose. When individuals or groups engage in rituals that connect them to the cycles of the moon, the turning of the seasons, or the remembrance of ancestors, they are not simply performing acts of spiritual protection. They are also addressing their psychological need for stability, for reassurance in times of anxiety or uncertainty. In a world where so much feels beyond one's control, these rituals offer a rare sense of agency, a way to take control of one's spiritual destiny, to carve out a space in the world that feels protected and sacred. The process of performing a ritual is deeply personal and often therapeutic. Modern practitioners report a sense of emotional release during these ceremonies, a feeling of letting go of burdens and fears that might have been festering within. Whether it's through meditation, chanting, or ritualized movement, These practices provide a structured outlet for emotion, an avenue for confronting fear, anxiety, or grief. By creating a physical and symbolic boundary, these rituals allow individuals to process difficult emotions in a safe and contained environment. The act of performing these ceremonies, whether done alone or in community, provides comfort, a sense of control over life's unpredictability, and a deeper connection to something greater than the self. Moreover, these rituals are often seen as a way to reconnect with something older, something deeper, an ancestral wisdom that, in today's fast-paced world, feels lost. When practitioners tap into these ancient practices, they feel as though they are not alone. They are connected to a long line of people, all of whom have faced the same existential fears and turned to similar methods of protection. In this way, performing these ancient rituals becomes not just an act of spiritual protection, but a reaffirmation of shared human experience. The feeling of continuity, of standing on the shoulders of those who came before, offers solace in a world that often feels fractured and disconnected. This psychological comfort is not merely abstract. It has real, tangible effects on practitioners. Studies have shown that ritualized behavior can help reduce stress and anxiety, creating a sense of calm and predictability in an otherwise chaotic world. In modern witchcraft, for example, many practitioners use the phases of the moon as a guide for their spiritual and emotional practices, aligning their personal goals with the natural rhythms of the earth. This synchronization with the natural world provides a sense of order and purpose, even in times of personal chaos. The act of performing these rituals creates a psychological anchor, a ritualistic boundary between the known and the unknown, the safe and the unsafe. For many, these ceremonies offer a deep sense of comfort, helping them navigate the challenges of modern life. But why do these rituals still matter today? In part, it is because they offer a unique form of protection that is both spiritual and psychological. They provide a framework for understanding the unseen forces in the world, whether those are spiritual, emotional, or existential. As we face new challenges in the modern world, from technological overwhelm to existential concerns about the future of humanity, the need for spiritual protection has only grown. People are increasingly turning back to the ancient ways, looking for tools to help them navigate the complex, often overwhelming landscape of modern life. These rituals also fulfill a need for connection, not just with the past, but with the earth and the cosmos. In a world where many people feel disconnected from nature, these rituals offer a means to realign with the cycles of life, death, and rebirth that govern all existence. They tap into a deep, primal need to feel connected to the world in a meaningful way, to restore a sense of balance between the individual and the universe. In the next section, we will explore how these rituals, once hidden and suppressed, have found a place in modern spirituality. As we see, these ancient practices continue to evolve and adapt, meeting the spiritual needs of today's seekers. The desire for spiritual protection and connection is as old as humanity itself, and the ancient rituals that once protected souls from the darkness continue to serve as a profound source of strength in the modern world. They may have changed, they may have adapted, but their core purpose remains unchanged, providing comfort, solace, and spiritual protection to those who seek it. In the modern age, where technology, rationalism, and secularism often dominate, the yearning for deeper spiritual connection has led many to explore the hidden corners of mysticism. Ancient practices, once buried under the weight of religious dogma, political suppression, and cultural shifts, are reawakening. As society has drifted further from nature, the sacred, and ancestral wisdom, an increasing number of people are turning to mystical traditions to fulfill a profound need for meaning, connection, and protection against the unseen forces of life. The modern mysticism we see today is not simply a trend, it's a rebirth, a rediscovery of ancient knowledge that has been carefully hidden, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The roots of modern mysticism can be traced directly back to ancient practices that centered around the night, the unseen, and the spiritual protection of the self and community. Throughout history, human beings have felt a deep need to understand, communicate with, and protect themselves from the spirits of the world beyond. Whether through rituals that appease benevolent ancestors or ward off malevolent forces, the night has always been a time of spiritual significance. These rituals were not merely symbolic acts, they were spiritual safeguards, deeply embedded in the daily lives of the people. Over time, as organized religions took hold and secular governments rose to power, these rituals were suppressed, labeled as superstitions, and driven underground. But the need for spiritual protection and connection to the unseen forces did not simply vanish. Instead, these ancient practices were preserved in hidden forms, passed down through secret societies, esoteric orders, and folk traditions. And now, in the 21st century, they are emerging once again in modern spiritual movements such as neo-paganism, modern witchcraft, and neo-shamanism. These movements, which have gained considerable momentum in recent decades, are drawing directly from the well of ancient mystical traditions, rituals, and ceremonies that once connected the living with the spirits of the night, the ancestors, and the earth itself. At the heart of these modern mystical movements is the idea that ancient wisdom holds the key to spiritual survival in today's world. As modern life becomes increasingly disconnected from the natural world, people are seeking new ways to reconnect with something sacred, something that resonates deeply with the human soul. For many, these new movements are seen as a way to reclaim the old practices that were once suppressed or forgotten. What was once hidden in plain sight is now being reinterpreted and adapted to the challenges and anxieties of modern life. Modern witchcraft is perhaps the most visible manifestation of this resurgence. Wicca, a form of contemporary witchcraft, has its roots in ancient paganism and is deeply influenced by nature-based spirituality. Central to Wicca is the belief in the sacredness of the earth, the reverence for the moon and sun, and the power of rituals to influence the world around us. Wiccans perform ceremonies that are strikingly similar to the ancient night rituals of their ancestors. Full moon rituals, for example, are often used for protection, healing, and spiritual cleansing. These rituals are seen as a way to tap into the lunar energy that governs not only the cycles of nature but also the spiritual realms. By invoking the power of the moon, modern witches believe they can shield themselves from negative influences, much like their ancient counterparts, who sought to protect themselves from malevolent spirits during the darkest hours. Neo-shamanism, too, draws heavily on ancient rituals and spiritual practices, particularly those of indigenous cultures around the world. Shamans in ancient times were believed to be the intermediaries between the human world and the spirit realm. Today, neo-shamans attempt to revive these traditions, reconnecting with the spirits of nature, ancestors, and the unseen world. Many neo-shamanic practices involve rituals that are meant to heal and protect the soul, drawing on techniques such as journeying, drumming, and plant medicine to access spiritual realms. These practices are often framed as methods of reclaiming one's spiritual autonomy and protection against the anxieties of modern life. In some ways, neo-shamanism is a direct continuation of the ancient night ceremonies, rituals that provided protection from both spiritual and existential threats. One of the most significant aspects of the revival of these ancient practices is how they address a deep psychological need in modern society. Today's world is often described as spiritually barren, with many feeling disconnected from their roots and the natural world. In this context, these new mystical movements offer a return to something older, something more rooted in the cycles of nature and the cosmos. By participating in moon rituals, solstice ceremonies, and other ancient rites, modern practitioners are reasserting their spiritual connection to the earth and the forces beyond. They are not just seeking protection from malevolent spirits, but also protection from the disconnection, alienation, and uncertainty that characterize modern existence. These modern movements, however, are not simply about recreating ancient practices in their original form. They are reinterpretations, often blending the old with the new. For instance, many modern spiritual leaders and practitioners incorporate elements of psychology, personal empowerment, and even ecology into their ceremonies. They recognize that the ancient rites were not only about spiritual protection, but also about creating a sense of harmony with the world, both seen and unseen. In a time when mental health and emotional well-being are just as important as spiritual health, these new mystical practices provide a holistic approach to healing, protection, and self-discovery. The growth of these movements also reflects a broader shift in how people approach spirituality in general. The rigid structures of traditional religions are being replaced by more fluid, personal practices that allow individuals to explore their spiritual needs on their own terms. Modern mysticism, rooted in ancient traditions, is part of this shift. It offers a spiritual path that emphasizes direct experience, personal connection, and empowerment, and all while honoring the wisdom of the past. It invites people to step into their own power, reclaim ancient knowledge, and adapt it to the challenges of modern life. What makes modern mysticism particularly compelling is its ability to meet people where they are spiritually and emotionally. In an age where many feel disconnected from the sacred, these new movements offer an opportunity to rediscover and adapt ancient spiritual practices for a world that desperately needs meaning and connection. By drawing on the ancient rites that protected souls from darkness, these movements are helping people protect their own spirits in a world that often feels overwhelming and unpredictable. As we continue to explore how these ancient practices are being revived, we will look in more detail at the specific rituals and ceremonies that are being brought back into modern spiritual practice. How are practitioners today incorporating elements of the ancient night rituals into their spiritual lives? How have these rituals adapted to meet the needs of contemporary society, and what role do they play in modern-day spiritual protection and healing? The revival of these practices is not just a return to the past, but a rebirth, one that speaks to the timeless human need for connection, meaning, and protection in a world that can feel at times dark and uncertain. The night, once a time feared for its darkness and the unseen forces that it harbored, is now celebrated in modern spirituality, reclaiming the ancient reverence for the power of the unknown. The full moon in particular has emerged as a central symbol in contemporary spiritual practices, with many groups looking to harness its energy for personal growth, protection, and healing. What was once a time of danger and mystery, when rituals were conducted to shield the soul from malevolent spirits, has transformed into a space of opportunity, transformation, and spiritual power. But beneath these modern adaptations lies a deep ancestral connection to the rituals of the past, especially those centered around the moon and the sacred darkness of the night. In ancient cultures, the night was not merely the absence of light, but a potent, transformative space. The darkness was believed to hold great power, a threshold between the living and the spiritual realms. It was a time when the boundaries between the physical and the unseen were at their most fragile, allowing spirits, both protective and malevolent, to move freely between worlds. It was during these hours that ancient villagers performed rituals to ensure their safety, to protect themselves from wandering spirits, and to shield their souls from the darkness that threatened to consume them. The moon in its various phases was seen as a powerful tool to navigate the spiritual realms and harness the unseen energies of the night. Today, modern spiritual practice have reclaimed the moon's power, infusing these ancient nighttime ceremonies with contemporary meanings and purposes. The full moon, in particular, has become a time of intense spiritual focus. For many modern practitioners, full moon rituals are a means of drawing down the moon's energy to cleanse, heal, and protect. These ceremonies are often seen as an opportunity to release old patterns, reflect on personal growth, and connect with higher spiritual realms. What was once a ceremony to ward off darkness is now a practice of bringing light into the dark corners of the soul, shedding old emotional wounds, and stepping into a new phase of self-realization. Full moon circles have become a central practice for many contemporary spiritual groups, particularly in the realms of modern witchcraft and neo-paganism. These circles, often held outdoors under the open sky, are spaces for communal gathering, reflection, and spiritual work. The rituals themselves vary widely, but common elements include intention setting, prayer, meditation, chanting, and the use of sacred tools like candles, crystals, and herbs. The full moon is often seen as a time to manifest one's desires, to bring clarity to areas of life that need healing, and to protect oneself from spiritual or emotional harm. Much like the ancient villagers, modern practitioners believe that the moon holds the key to connecting with the divine and with the unseen forces that influence our lives. However, modern moon rituals are not just about protection from negative forces. They are also deeply tied to personal empowerment and transformation. In ancient times, the moon's phases marked the passage of time, guiding individuals through the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Today, many practitioners use the full moon as a tool for personal development, tapping into its energy to release limiting beliefs, heal emotional wounds, and step into their full potential. The full moon is not just a time to protect the soul from external threats, but a sacred moment to engage in deep self-reflection and self-empowerment. The symbolism of the moon in modern spirituality also speaks to a deeper need for connection, both to nature and to the unseen. In our increasingly digital and disconnected world, rituals such as full moon ceremonies offer a tangible way to reestablish a sense of sacredness and grounding. By aligning oneself with the natural cycles of the moon, practitioners feel a deeper sense of belonging, reconnecting with the rhythms that have governed life for centuries. These rituals provide a bridge between the present and the past, allowing people to tap into ancient knowledge and adapt it to their current needs. The ancient act of seeking protection in the darkness, whether from spirits, negative energies, or existential fears, still holds power in the modern world, but it has been reshaped to reflect contemporary concerns. In the past, nighttime rituals were conducted to protect the body and soul from evil forces. Today, they are seen as a means of navigating personal darkness, the fears, traumas, and emotional struggles that can overwhelm the spirit. Full moon rituals, in particular, provide a space to confront these inner shadows, allowing practitioners to release pent-up emotions and find healing. The protection once sought from external malevolent spirits is now sought within, as individuals work to safeguard their inner peace and balance. These practices are not just for those who follow traditional spiritual paths like neo-paganism or witchcraft. Many people in modern society, drawn to the metaphysical and esoteric, are finding solace in the idea of harnessing the moon's energy for personal growth and protection. Full moon ceremonies have been integrated into self-help movements and mindfulness practices, blending ancient rituals with modern psychological insights. They are increasingly seen as a way to restore balance and harmony, allowing individuals to step into their power and heal from past trauma. In a world where mental health is becoming a central concern, moon rituals offer a spiritual tool to address emotional and psychological needs, grounding individuals in the present while providing a sense of safety and connection. The revival of these ancient night rituals, moon circles, full moon ceremonies, and solstice celebrations speaks to a timeless need within the human spirit. These practices offer a way to protect the soul, to reconnect with the cycles of nature, and to find meaning in a world that can often feel chaotic and disconnected. While the original purpose of these rituals may have been to ward off the dark forces that roam the earth at night, today they serve as a way to illuminate the darker aspects of the self, bringing healing and protection to the soul in a deeply personal and transformative way. As we move forward, we will explore how these ancient practices, once lost to time, are now being integrated into modern psychological and spiritual practices. How do these rituals serve not only as spiritual protection, but also as a means of personal healing and self-development? The night, once feared for its darkness, has become a source of profound spiritual power, and the ancient ceremonies that once protected souls now guide individuals toward a deeper understanding of themselves and their place in the world. For centuries, ancient rituals were designed with one clear purpose: to protect the soul from the unseen forces of darkness that lurked beyond the physical world. But in modern times, these rituals have taken on new meaning, evolving from mere protection to powerful tools for personal growth, emotional healing, and self-discovery. Today, many practitioners of mysticism and alternative spirituality engage in these ceremonies not just to shield themselves from external threats, but as a means to work through emotional trauma, anxiety, and fear. As the boundaries between psychology and spirituality blur, these ancient practices are being adapted to serve modern psychological needs, offering a profound way to heal, protect, and empower the self. The intersection of psychology and spirituality is not a new concept, but it has gained significant attention in recent years. As mental health issues like anxiety, depression, and stress continue to rise, people are turning to alternative spiritual practices to supplement traditional therapy and self-care routines. Ancient rituals, once focused primarily on spiritual protection, are now seen as vehicles for emotional healing, providing a structured way for individuals to confront their inner fears, trauma, and unresolved emotions. These ceremonies, whether it's a full moon ritual, a solstice celebration, or a solitary meditation in the dark, offer a safe space for personal reflection, healing, and transformation. At the core of many modern spiritual practices is the idea that the energy around us is deeply connected to our mental and emotional states. In this sense, rituals such as protection ceremonies, often performed under the cover of night, can be viewed through a psychological lens as exercises in boundary setting. In ancient times, the boundaries established during these rituals were physical, symbols drawn with salt, herbs placed around the home, and sacred spaces created to ward off malevolent spirits. Today, these same rituals are often adapted to protect one's personal energy, creating psychological boundaries that safeguard the individual from the emotional or spiritual drains of modern life. Take, for example, the use of modern versions of full moon rituals. These rituals, once believed to harness the moon's energy for spiritual protection, now offer practitioners an opportunity to release pent-up emotions, negative thought patterns, and toxic energies. The full moon, a symbol of illumination, becomes a powerful metaphor for shedding light on one's inner darkness, whether that be anxiety, fear, or emotional pain. In the quiet of the night, individuals may gather to perform rituals designed to release these burdens, making space for personal healing and growth. For many, the process of performing these ceremonies creates a ritualized, safe environment in which to confront their subconscious fears, facilitating emotional release and transformation. Psychologically, these ancient practices serve as tools for grounding and empowerment. When modern practitioners engage in rituals such as protection ceremonies, they often do so to build inner strength and resilience. For individuals grappling with feelings of vulnerability, whether from external stressors or internal conflicts, these rituals provide a structured way to tap into inner power. The act of invoking protective energies, of calling upon the forces of nature or the spirits of ancestors, serves as a reminder of one's own strength. It affirms the practitioner's ability to face the unknown with confidence, offering a psychological shield against the overwhelming emotions that can often accompany uncertainty, fear, or trauma. Moreover, these rituals also tap into the transformative power of the subconscious mind. Ancient practices often relied on symbols, chants, and movements that invoke deeper layers of consciousness. Today, these same elements are being used in modern spiritual practices to access the subconscious mind, where many emotional and psychological issues reside. Through ritual, meditation, and symbolic acts, individuals can address unresolved fears, trauma, and emotional wounds. This process mirrors therapeutic practices like cognitive behavioral therapy, where individuals confront and reframe limiting beliefs. However, in modern mysticism, this work is often done with the help of ancient symbols and rituals, providing a deeply personal and spiritual context for emotional healing. The act of ritual itself is inherently therapeutic. It provides structure, purpose, and focus in an often chaotic world. In the same way that journaling or mindfulness can help individuals process their emotions, ritual provides a symbolic space for the release of negative energy, the honoring of personal growth, and the reaffirmation of one's spiritual self. When individuals engage in rituals of protection, they are not only shielding themselves from the external world, but are also protecting their emotional and mental state from being overwhelmed by life's stresses. This sense of control over one's energy is empowering, offering relief from the anxiety of a world that often feels unpredictable and out of control. What makes these ancient rituals particularly powerful in the context of modern psychology is their ability to facilitate deep, transformative experiences. They allow individuals to tap into a larger sense of purpose and connection, whether that is through communion with the natural world, a higher spiritual power, or simply through the collective energy of a community practicing together. This sense of connection is often missing in modern life, where many people feel disconnected from both their roots and the larger forces that govern existence. These rituals, deeply embedded in human history, offer a return to a time when people understood their place in the world as part of a greater interconnected whole. This reconnecting to the divine or the earth, even in symbolic forms, can offer profound emotional and psychological benefits. As people increasingly turn to these ancient rituals as a means of addressing modern psychological challenges, they are finding that the practices offer more than just spiritual protection. They offer a way to heal, transform, and empower themselves. By drawing on ancient knowledge, people today are creating new paths for personal development and emotional well-being, blending the wisdom of the past with the psychological needs of the present. In the next section, we will explore how social media and modern technology are playing a pivotal role in the dissemination and popularization of these ancient practices. As these rituals are shared, adapted, and reinterpreted in the digital age, they are reaching more people than ever before, giving rise to a global movement of individuals seeking spiritual protection, healing, and self-discovery. These ancient practices, once hidden away, are now being embraced by millions around the world in ways that bridge the gap between the old and the new. In every culture, across time and space, there have always been individuals who stood as the guardians of spiritual knowledge, keepers of secrets that could protect, empower, or transform. These figures, shamans, priests, wise elders, and spiritual guides, were entrusted with sacred wisdom that was not to be shared with the masses. Their role in society was critical. They were the intermediaries between the human world and the spiritual realms, those who could commune with the unseen forces that govern the cosmos and protect their people from the darker, malevolent energies that lurk just beyond the veil. In ancient times, these spiritual leaders were revered as the protectors of the soul. They were the ones who carried the rituals of the night, the ceremonies that safeguarded the living from restless spirits, evil entities, and the darkness that could consume the unwary. They were not only healers, but also teachers, initiators, and guardians of hidden knowledge. It was their responsibility to ensure that the sacred rituals of spiritual protection were passed down through the generations, often in secret, to a select few who could be trusted with this powerful knowledge. Shamans, for example, were believed to have direct access to the spirit world. They could enter altered states of consciousness through meditation, drumming, or sacred plants, and in these states, they would communicate with spirits, ancestors, and even the elements themselves. Shamans were often seen as the spiritual protectors of their communities, called upon in times of crisis to ward off dark forces or heal the spiritually wounded. They were entrusted with the most potent rituals of protection, often performing them during the dead of night when the boundaries between the living and the spirit world were most fragile. These rituals involved not only protecting the body, but also securing the soul from wandering spirits, curses, and negative energies that could possess or harm the living. Priests and priestesses, particularly in ancient civilizations such as Egypt, Greece, and Mesopotamia, played a similar role. They were often seen as direct representatives of the gods and were entrusted with sacred rites designed to protect the soul from evil. The ancient Egyptians, for example, believed that the afterlife was a continuation of the soul's journey, and priests were responsible for performing rituals to ensure that the soul could pass safely into the next world. These priests knew the ancient ceremonies that could ward off malevolent spirits and help the deceased navigate the dangers of the underworld. They also played a key role in protecting the living, offering blessings and spiritual guidance to ensure that the community was shielded from darkness. These spiritual leaders were often selected by divine right or spiritual calling. Their wisdom was seen as a gift, one that they could pass down only to those deemed worthy. The process of initiation into these sacred traditions was long and arduous, and only a select few were chosen to carry on the knowledge. The wisdom they held was not to be given freely, for it was believed that the power of these rituals was too potent for those who were not spiritually prepared. In this way, spiritual leaders were the stewards of the soul's protection, entrusted with the preservation of sacred knowledge that was critical to the survival and well-being of the community. As we move into modern times, the role of spiritual leaders in preserving ancient knowledge has evolved, but their task remains just as vital. Today, some modern mystics and spiritual guides claim to have rediscovered or inherited the ancient knowledge of their ancestors. These contemporary figures, often working outside of traditional religious institutions, assert that they have been entrusted with the wisdom of the past, reviving forgotten ceremonies and rituals to address the spiritual needs of today's seekers. Modern spiritual leaders, particularly those within the neo-pagan, witchcraft, and New Age communities, often position themselves as the inheritors of ancient wisdom. These leaders claim to have unearthed lost practices, either through personal revelation, the study of ancient texts, or the guidance of spiritual ancestors. Their role in the revival of ancient night rituals, moon ceremonies, and spiritual protection practices is central to the modern resurgence of mysticism. They are seen as the keepers of a hidden flame, reviving ancient traditions that were once suppressed but now reemerging in a new context. These contemporary leaders often present themselves as guardians of a sacred lineage, individuals who carry the wisdom of ancient spiritual traditions that were once passed down through secret teachings and sacred initiations. They use the same tools, rituals, symbols, chants, and ceremonies that have been used for centuries to protect the soul, but they adapt these practices to fit modern concerns. In a world where many people feel disconnected from their spiritual roots, these leaders offer a bridge to the past, helping individuals reconnect with ancient knowledge that addresses contemporary spiritual, emotional, and psychological needs. One key aspect of modern spiritual leaders' work is the integration of ancient spiritual practices with modern concerns. While the original purpose of many of these rituals was to protect the soul from dark forces, modern practitioners often adapt them to help with personal empowerment, healing from trauma, and addressing fears and anxieties. The rituals of protection, once centered on guarding against malevolent spirits, are now also used as tools for protecting one's emotional and psychological well-being. By blending ancient wisdom with contemporary psychology, modern spiritual leaders offer a holistic approach to spiritual growth and healing, empowering individuals to tap into their inner strength and reclaim control over their spiritual and emotional lives. The power of these spiritual leaders lies not just in their ability to perform rituals, but in their ability to interpret and adapt ancient practices for modern times. Their work is as much about preserving a tradition as it is about evolving it to meet the needs of today's world. In a sense, they carry on the legacy of the ancient shamans and priests, acting as guardians of the spiritual knowledge that has withstood centuries of suppression, yet continues to hold relevance in the modern age. As we move forward in exploring the survival of these ancient practices, we will examine how some of this hidden knowledge was passed down through lineages, secret societies, and esoteric orders, ensuring that the wisdom of the past was never truly lost. These secretive channels of transmission played a crucial role in the preservation and transmission of the sacred knowledge, allowing it to survive in secret and emerge once again in the modern world. The story of these hidden guardians and their role in safeguarding ancient wisdom is integral to understanding how these practices have endured and thrived in today's spiritual landscape. Throughout history, the preservation of sacred knowledge and ancient spiritual practices has often been relegated to secrecy. In times of political or religious persecution, when the established order sought to suppress the old ways, secret societies, hidden lineages, and esoteric organizations became the guardians of forbidden wisdom. These societies, which operated under the radar of mainstream society, were the custodians of the most powerful and secretive spiritual traditions that included night rituals, protection ceremonies, and communion with spirits. For centuries, these societies safeguarded practices that were not only sacred, but also considered dangerous or subversive by the powers that be. The need for secrecy in the transmission of spiritual knowledge arose from the very real threat of persecution. As religions and political powers sought to control and standardize spiritual practices, ancient traditions that once flourished openly became hidden. In many parts of the world, the old spiritual practices were seen as threats to the dominance of monotheistic religions and centralized power structures. The knowledge that had been passed down through generations was too potent, too dangerous to be shared openly. As a result, these practices were preserved in secret, hidden away from the prying eyes of the public, and often shared only with a select few who were deemed worthy. Secret societies like the Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and various occult groups were central to the preservation of these ancient practices. The Freemasons, for example, have long been associated with the preservation and transmission of esoteric knowledge. While their outward focus was on the principles of brotherhood, charity, and moral guidance, many scholars and spiritual practitioners have long speculated that they also functioned as a repository for ancient rituals and sacred knowledge. Initiates into the Masonic order were often exposed to secret teachings that involve symbolism, sacred geometry, and mystical practices that could be traced back to ancient spiritual traditions. These rituals, which included elements of protection and spiritual empowerment, were often hidden in allegories and codes, accessible only to those who had undergone the necessary initiation. Similarly, the Rosicrucians, a mystical order that emerged in the 17th century, were believed to have preserved knowledge from ancient alchemists and spiritual adepts. The Rosicrucian manifestos, which circulated widely in Europe during this time, alluded to a hidden tradition of spiritual wisdom and protection that was closely tied to the cycles of nature, the elements, and the cosmos. Like the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians operated in secrecy, passing down their knowledge only to those deemed capable of understanding its depths. Their focus was on the mysteries of the universe and the hidden powers that could be accessed through sacred rituals, powers that included the ability to protect oneself from spiritual harm and influence the forces of nature. These secret societies did not simply safeguard ancient spiritual knowledge. They actively cultivated it, preserving and adapting it for each generation. In a world where such knowledge was often suppressed, these groups became the keepers of rituals that could protect the soul from malevolent forces. Whether through the invocation of spiritual guardians, the use of sacred symbols, or the performance of nightly rituals to ward off dark energies, these societies ensured that the ancient practices would survive. They understood the value of the knowledge they guarded, not just for the protection it offered, but for its ability to empower individuals and reconnect them with the divine. However, the secrecy surrounding these societies was not without its dangers. The very nature of their work made them subjects of suspicion and intrigue. Throughout history, secret societies have often been the target of conspiracy theories and rumors, with many people speculating that they were involved in darker, more nefarious activities. This fascination with their secrecy, combined with their association with forbidden knowledge, led to a mix of reverence and fear. Were these groups truly preserving spiritual wisdom, or were they hoarding knowledge that could be dangerous if it fell into the wrong hands? Despite the suspicion, these societies managed to keep their knowledge alive through careful transmission. The teachings were passed down through lineages of trusted initiates, individuals who were carefully selected based on their spiritual readiness and commitment to the work. This selective transmission ensured that the ancient practices were not diluted or corrupted, but remained intact, preserved in their original form for future generations. The secret societies understood that the power of these rituals was not to be taken lightly, and only those who demonstrated the right qualities, wisdom, integrity, and respect for the sacred knowledge, were granted access. In modern times, the role of these secret societies has shifted, though their influence continues to be felt. The decline of religious persecution and the rise of New Age spiritual movements have led to a more open exploration of ancient spiritual practices. Some modern spiritual leaders claim to have inherited or rediscovered the knowledge once protected by these secret societies. They speak of the lost teachings of the ancients, now re-emerging in contemporary spiritual circles. These modern leaders often present themselves as the custodians of the old ways, offering teachings, rituals, and ceremonies that echo the practices once hidden from public view. Today, some of these practices have found their way into the mainstream, albeit in more diluted forms. Full moon rituals, protection ceremonies, and nighttime spiritual work, once the domain of esoteric societies, are now practiced openly by those seeking spiritual protection and personal empowerment. However, the core teachings, passed down through these secret lineages, remain elusive, accessible only to those who are able to connect with the deeper, hidden wisdom of the past. Despite the modern adaptation of these ancient practices, the question remains: how much of the original knowledge has been preserved, and how much has been lost or altered over time? The transmission of sacred knowledge, once guarded so closely, has inevitably been influenced by the demands of contemporary society, and with that, some of its mystery and power may have been diluted. However, the continued interest in secret societies, hidden lineages, and esoteric traditions indicates that the thirst for ancient spiritual knowledge remains strong. People are still drawn to these mysteries, eager to uncover the truths that were once kept hidden. As we move forward in our exploration of these secret teachings, we will examine the challenges that modern spiritual leaders face as they navigate the delicate balance between preserving ancient knowledge and sharing it in a world that increasingly demands transparency. How have these ancient teachings adapted to the modern world, and what does it mean for the future of spiritual practices? The journey from secrecy to openness continues, and the ancient wisdom of the past may yet have much to offer in the unfolding story of human spiritual evolution. In the digital age, where information flows freely and knowledge is often just a click away, the ancient spiritual practices that were once carefully guarded by secret societies are now experiencing a resurgence. However, the role of the modern-day keeper of these sacred rituals is not without tension. Spiritual leaders, occultists, and esoteric practitioners who claim to have inherited or rediscovered these practices face the challenge of preserving the integrity of ancient traditions while navigating the growing interest in the occult and the pressures of commercialization. These modern-day keepers, often mystics, occultists, and spiritual guides, see themselves as the stewards of ancient wisdom that has been passed down through generations. Some claim to have received this knowledge through direct initiation into lineages that have been secretly maintained for centuries, while others have spent years studying esoteric traditions, ancient texts, and spiritual practices. Many of these spiritual leaders consider themselves the guardians of rituals that were once performed under the cover of darkness. Rituals designed to protect the soul, communicate with spirits, and maintain the balance between the material and spiritual worlds. But as interest in these ancient practices grows, particularly in the wake of the New Age spiritual movement and the rise of modern witchcraft, there is an undeniable tension between secrecy and openness. The internet and social media have democratized knowledge, making ancient rituals more accessible to the masses than ever before. YouTube videos, online courses, and social media platforms allow anyone with an internet connection to explore occult teachings and practices. This new accessibility raises questions. How can these modern keepers of ancient wisdom protect the sacredness of these rituals in a world that is increasingly open and at times commercially driven? For some spiritual leaders, the risk of commercialization is a constant concern. What was once sacred and hidden is now being marketed, often with a focus on selling spiritual products or experiences. Full moon rituals, protection ceremonies, and other sacred practices are sometimes packaged and sold as part of a spiritual marketplace, where the lines between genuine spiritual growth and the commercialization of ancient wisdom become blurred. Modern-day mystics and esoteric practitioners are faced with the challenge of ensuring that these practices retain their authenticity and power in a world where spiritual practices are often commodified for profit. Many of these spiritual leaders are deeply committed to maintaining the sanctity of the rituals, carefully guiding their students or followers through the process of initiation and understanding. They often emphasize the importance of personal transformation and the responsibility that comes with engaging in ancient spiritual practices. The intention behind the ritual is paramount, and for these modern-day keepers, ensuring that their followers approach these sacred rites with the proper mindset is crucial. Some groups hold private, invitation-only ceremonies, allowing only those who are committed to deep spiritual work to participate. This selective approach helps maintain the integrity of the practices and ensures that the rituals are not diluted or trivialized. At the same time, many modern spiritual leaders also understand the necessity of adapting these ancient practices for contemporary seekers. Spirituality has evolved significantly since the days when these rituals were first developed, and these modern keepers acknowledge that the context in which these practices are performed has changed. To some extent, the rituals must adapt to fit the needs of today's world, dealing with personal empowerment, trauma healing, and emotional well-being. While the core intentions of protection and spiritual connection remain unchanged, the way these rituals are framed and practiced must evolve to meet the psychological and emotional needs of contemporary society. The rise of online spiritual communities and digital platforms has led to the widespread dissemination of occult and esoteric teachings. While this has created opportunities for spiritual seekers to engage with ancient knowledge, it has also raised concerns about the authenticity of these practices. In a world where anyone can claim to be a spiritual teacher or guide, how can modern-day keepers of ancient wisdom maintain the integrity of the teachings they offer? Many spiritual leaders now face the challenge of finding a balance between sharing their knowledge and protecting the sacredness of the rituals they preserve. For some, this means operating in the shadows, providing teachings only to those who prove themselves worthy through initiation, personal work, or deep commitment. Others have embraced a more open approach, offering public teachings and resources, but still adhering to strict guidelines about how the rituals should be practiced. In addition to maintaining the authenticity of the rituals, modern keepers must also navigate the delicate balance between secrecy and openness in a society where information is readily available. While some spiritual leaders have resisted the growing trend of publicly sharing occult knowledge, others have found ways to adapt and ensure that these ancient practices remain relevant and accessible in the modern world. The internet, for all its potential to dilute sacred knowledge, has also created a platform for like-minded individuals to come together, share experiences, and learn from those who are dedicated to preserving these ancient traditions. The modern keepers of ancient spiritual practices are thus faced with a paradox: how to preserve the sacredness of these rituals while adapting them for a modern audience that craves access to knowledge. As ancient practices are passed down to new generations of seekers, the risk of commercialization and oversimplification looms large. However, these spiritual leaders continue to safeguard the rituals, understanding that the power of these ancient practices lies not just in their outward form, but in the deep spiritual work they require. In the next section, we will explore the future of these rituals as society continues to evolve. How will these ancient practices continue to evolve and adapt in a world where the spiritual marketplace is becoming increasingly crowded? Will they remain hidden, reserved for a select few, or will they eventually become more widely accessible? As the demand for ancient spiritual practices continues to grow, the modern keepers of these secrets will face even greater challenges in maintaining the sanctity of the traditions they protect. The future of these rituals will depend on their ability to balance secrecy, authenticity, and openness as they navigate the intersection between ancient wisdom and the modern world. In the midst of a world dominated by technology, where daily life revolves around screens, social media, and constant connectivity, ancient spiritual practices are experiencing a remarkable resurgence. These practices, once confined to the shadows, hidden away in sacred texts, secret societies, or whispered in small, isolated communities, are now finding new life in the digital age. Today, mystics, spiritual seekers, and even modern-day shamans are using the internet as a tool to revive and share ancient knowledge, particularly those rituals and ceremonies that have traditionally been used for soul protection and spiritual empowerment. The digital space, with its vast reach and immediacy, has fundamentally transformed how spiritual practices are taught, shared, and adapted. Platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and various online forums have become digital sanctuaries where people from all walks of life can learn about moon rituals, protection ceremonies, and ancient rites of passage. Spiritual leaders, who once operated behind closed doors or in private initiations, can now broadcast their teachings to a global audience, offering a window into practices that were once carefully guarded. The rise of the digital mystic, as some have come to call it, is a direct response to the modern search for meaning in a world where materialism, technology, and the rapid pace of life can often leave individuals feeling spiritually adrift. Ancient rituals, once hidden from view, are now being brought into the open, thanks to the accessibility of the digital world. Full moon rituals, solstice celebrations, and protective rites that were traditionally practiced in quiet corners of the world are now being conducted in virtual circles. Spiritual leaders who have rediscovered these ancient practices are using online platforms to teach others, making these once secret ceremonies available to anyone with an internet connection. One of the most striking aspects of this digital revival is the global reach of spiritual teachings. In the past, accessing these hidden practices might have required extensive travel or initiation into a particular group or society. Today, people from every corner of the globe can access teachings about ancient night rituals, protective ceremonies, and mystical practices with just a few clicks. Online workshops, virtual retreats, and live stream ceremonies have replaced the traditional physical space once required for such practices. For example, modern-day witches and occultists now host online moon circles, where individuals can join a virtual community to perform full moon rituals together, no matter where they are located. This creates a sense of global solidarity as individuals connect over shared spiritual intentions, empowering each other with ancient practices that transcend geographical boundaries. The digital world has not only made these practices more accessible, but has also changed the way they are approached. In the past, spiritual leaders and practitioners often guarded their knowledge jealously, passing it down only through trusted lineages and select initiations. Today, however, the open access nature of the internet means that anyone with the desire to learn can do so. This democratization of spiritual knowledge has sparked both excitement and concern among those who believe that certain practices are too sacred to be made so widely available. While some spiritual leaders embrace this newfound accessibility, others worry that the sacredness of these ancient rituals may be diluted or commodified in the process. Despite these concerns, many spiritual leaders are finding ways to adapt these ancient teachings for a modern audience, using the digital space to make spiritual protection practices relevant to contemporary concerns. Ancient rituals, originally designed to protect people from malevolent spirits or supernatural forces, are now being reinterpreted to address modern anxieties, such as the fear of the unknown, existential crisis, and the overwhelming stress of daily life. The practice of soul protection, once focused on guarding against physical dangers, now includes psychological and emotional healing. Full moon rituals, for example, are being adapted as opportunities for emotional cleansing and self-care. Practitioners use the moon's energy to release negative emotions, set new intentions, and protect themselves from emotional exhaustion in a world filled with constant information overload. This intersection of ancient practices and modern technology is reshaping how people approach their spiritual lives. The internet has allowed for a more flexible, individualized approach to spirituality, with people able to engage with practices in a way that suits their personal needs. The traditional hierarchical structures that once governed spiritual teachings have shifted, replaced by a more fluid, decentralized model of spiritual learning. Individuals can now learn from a variety of sources, picking and choosing the teachings that resonate most with them. They may watch a YouTube video on protective rituals, participate in a Facebook group dedicated to spiritual healing, or attend a Zoom workshop on moon rituals, all from the comfort of their own homes. For some, this new accessibility to spiritual knowledge is liberating, offering a sense of empowerment and autonomy in their spiritual journey. In a world where so many aspects of life are dictated by external forces, governments, corporations, and institutions, being able to connect with and learn from spiritual leaders on their own terms is a deeply empowering experience. The internet has democratized access to sacred knowledge, enabling anyone with a desire for personal growth or spiritual protection to engage with these ancient practices. However, the rise of digital mysticism is not without its challenges. The very nature of the internet, where information is rapidly disseminated and consumed, means that the deeper, more nuanced aspects of these practices can be lost. What once took years of study, initiation, and personal commitment to master is now available in bite-sized pieces, often packaged in easily digestible formats, like blog posts, videos, and ebooks. While this makes ancient knowledge more accessible, it also raises questions about the quality and depth of the information being shared. Are these teachings being watered down? Are they being shared responsibly? Are the true depths of these practices being maintained, or are they being reduced to a trend for social media likes? The digital world has also introduced a new level of commercialization to the spiritual marketplace. In a world where everything has a price tag, even spiritual knowledge is being commodified. Online courses, spiritual tools, and virtual ceremonies are often sold to a growing market of individuals seeking quick fixes for their spiritual and emotional needs. The risk here is that these sacred practices, once intended for deep personal transformation, may be reduced to commercial products, sold and marketed to the masses in a way that dilutes their authenticity and spiritual potency. As we move forward, we will delve into how the growing global accessibility of these practices is reshaping how people approach spiritual protection and personal empowerment today. The digital age has made it possible for anyone to access ancient knowledge, but the question remains, what impact will this widespread availability have on the future of these rituals? Will they remain sacred and transformative, or will they become another commodity in the ever-growing marketplace of spirituality? In the interconnected world of the 21st century, the boundaries that once separated spiritual practices based on culture, geography, and tradition are becoming increasingly fluid. The internet, with its ability to connect people across vast distances, has played a crucial role in the globalization of spiritual protection rituals. Practices that were once localized to specific regions and often guarded as sacred secrets are now crossing borders, being shared, adapted, and integrated into diverse cultural contexts. What was once private knowledge passed down through generations within small, tightly knit communities is now accessible to anyone with an internet connection. This exchange of spiritual practices, particularly night rituals and protection ceremonies, is fostering the creation of a global spiritual movement. For example, rituals from European witchcraft, African spiritual traditions, South American shamanism, and various indigenous practices are now blending together, creating a new and eclectic approach to spiritual protection. Modern practitioners from around the world are combining elements of these ancient traditions, infusing them with contemporary concerns such as personal empowerment, mental health, and emotional healing. One striking example is the blending of European witchcraft traditions with African spiritual practices. In the past, these two systems were seen as completely distinct, European witchcraft being rooted in the pagan traditions of the West, and African spiritual practices often focusing on ancestor veneration, spirit communication, and nature-based rituals. However, Chuanin, the rise of modern witchcraft has seen these practices merge in exciting new ways. For instance, practitioners might combine African rituals of ancestral invocation with European spells of protection, using both to guard against negative spiritual influences or to empower themselves in challenging life situations. The internet has allowed individuals from different cultural backgrounds to share their experiences, learn from each other, and adapt rituals to fit their own needs. Similarly, South American shamanism, with its deep ties to the natural world and its use of plant medicines, has found a place in the broader spiritual community. While traditional shamanic practices were once confined to specific indigenous cultures in the Amazon or Andes, they are now being integrated into global healing practices. People from all over the world are engaging with shamanic ceremonies, sometimes in person, often through virtual retreats or guided meditations that use shamanic principles. These practices, which often include protection rituals involving spirit journeys or the use of sacred plants like ayahuasca, are now being blended with Western therapeutic practices, offering an innovative approach to healing trauma and spiritual protection. What's fascinating about this globalization of spiritual practices is that, as these rituals are shared, they are often adapted and reinterpreted to suit modern needs. People from different cultural backgrounds, faced with the struggles and anxieties of contemporary life, are using these ancient spiritual tools to address their personal challenges. A full moon ritual that once served to ward off evil spirits might now be used as a way to release emotional baggage or set intentions for personal growth. A protective ritual that was once performed to shield individuals from malevolent forces in the night might now be used as a way to protect one's energy from the emotional drains of modern life, such as work stress or toxic relationships. In this way, ancient practices are being recontextualized for the modern world, becoming powerful tools for self-empowerment and emotional healing. Many practitioners today view these rituals as not just ways to protect themselves from external threats, but also ways to navigate their inner worlds, confront fears, and heal from trauma. Spiritual protection, once seen as guarding against supernatural forces, is now interpreted as a way to safeguard one's emotional and psychological well-being. In this new context, ancient protection rituals are being used to establish personal boundaries, heal old wounds, and cultivate inner peace in a world that often feels overwhelming and disconnected. The exchange of spiritual knowledge across cultures has sparked the development of an increasingly global spiritual community. Platforms like social media, online forums, and digital workshops have allowed individuals from diverse backgrounds to share their practices and experiences with each other. These virtual spaces have become havens for those seeking spiritual guidance, providing opportunities for individuals to learn from teachers, mentors, and fellow seekers from around the world. The blending of cultural traditions within these online spaces fosters a sense of interconnectedness as people draw from a wide array of spiritual practices to create personalized rituals that address their own needs. However, as these practices cross borders and blend with modern beliefs, there are important questions to consider. Is something being lost in the process of adapting these ancient rituals to a global context? While the fusion of traditions can bring new life to spiritual practices, it can also lead to the dilution of their original meaning. The commercialization of spiritual practices, often driven by the internet's spiritual marketplace, poses a risk to the authenticity of the rituals. As more people seek out these practices for personal empowerment, there is a growing concern that the sacredness of these traditions might be compromised in the process. Additionally, the mixing of cultural traditions raises concerns about cultural appropriation. When spiritual practices that originated in specific cultural or indigenous contexts are adopted by people from outside those traditions, it can sometimes result in the misrepresentation or oversimplification of the original teachings. The line between respectful sharing and appropriation can be difficult to navigate, especially in a world where spiritual knowledge is increasingly commodified. Despite these challenges, the globalization of spiritual protection rituals has created a space where people can connect with ancient practices in new and meaningful ways. The internet has facilitated a spiritual exchange that was once impossible, allowing individuals to explore and adapt rituals from different cultures, learn from spiritual leaders around the world, and create a personalized approach to spiritual protection. The accessibility of these teachings has empowered many to take control of their spiritual lives, adapt ancient practices to their modern needs, and ultimately create a new global spiritual movement. As we continue to explore the practical applications of these ancient practices in today's world, we will examine how people are using these rituals in their daily lives. How do modern spiritual seekers use these ceremonies for personal protection, empowerment, and healing? And as these practices continue to evolve and merge across cultures, what might the future of spiritual protection rituals look like in the digital age? The blending of ancient wisdom with modern technology has already reshaped the landscape of spirituality, and it will be fascinating to see how these practices continue to evolve and thrive in a connected world. In the fast-paced, often overwhelming world we live in today, many people are turning to ancient spiritual practices to find balance, protection, and healing. While technology and medicine have made incredible advancements, there remains a growing belief that the ancient wisdom embedded in spiritual rituals holds powerful tools for safeguarding the soul and mind in a world filled with distractions, negativity, and uncertainty. Ancient night ceremonies, once performed to protect individuals from supernatural forces, are now being adapted to address contemporary concerns such as emotional healing, protection from toxic relationships, and maintaining mental clarity in an increasingly chaotic world. For many modern practitioners, these rituals provide a sense of empowerment, offering practical ways to protect their energy and cultivate a peaceful environment. One of the most common practices rooted in ancient traditions is the creation of spiritual boundaries around the home. This practice, which has been passed down through generations, is often performed at night, when the energies of the world are believed to be at their most active. Individuals use protective rituals to cleanse their living spaces, banish negative energy, and ensure that their home remains a sanctuary of peace. Techniques such as smudging with sage, sprinkling salt around doorways, or using protective symbols are all part of this tradition. These rituals are not just symbolic acts, but serve as tangible ways to create a space of safety and clarity. Moon rituals, particularly those centered around the full moon, are also a widely practiced form of spiritual protection. The moon, once revered as a powerful symbol of the cycles of life, death, and rebirth, continues to be a central focus of modern spiritual work. During the full moon, people gather to release negative emotions, let go of past trauma, and cleanse their energy. The moon's energy is believed to illuminate the dark corners of the soul, helping individuals face their fears and release emotional baggage. Modern practitioners adapt this ancient practice to their specific needs, performing rituals of healing and protection that are as personal as they are sacred. These ceremonies are often accompanied by meditation, prayer, and affirmation, reinforcing the intention of releasing negativity and welcoming new positive energy into one's life. Nightly protection prayers or meditations are another form of modern-day ritual rooted in ancient practices. These nightly ceremonies are designed to protect the individual's energy while they sleep, guarding against negative influences, intrusive thoughts, and spiritual disturbances. Individuals may use mantras, affirmations, or prayers before bed, often accompanied by visualization techniques that surround them with a protective shield of light or energy. For those who are particularly sensitive to energy, such as empaths, these nightly rituals can be a powerful tool for ensuring that their energy remains clear and protected, allowing for restful sleep and emotional balance. While these rituals have roots in ancient traditions, they have been adapted to address the unique challenges of modern life. Many people turn to these practices not only for protection, but also for emotional healing. In a world where stress, anxiety, and trauma are all too common, these night ceremonies offer a way to heal from past wounds, protect the mind and soul, and regain a sense of control. Protection rituals, once used to shield individuals from malevolent spirits, are now being employed to protect the psyche from negative thought patterns, emotional overwhelm, and the weight of modern anxieties. In this context, the rituals become a form of self-care, allowing individuals to reclaim their mental and emotional well-being. These practices also provide a sense of empowerment, offering individuals a way to take control of their spiritual lives. In an era where many people feel disconnected from their inner selves, these rituals serve as a reminder of one's ability to influence the unseen forces that shape their life. Whether it's through setting intentions during a full moon ritual, visualizing protection during a nightly prayer, or cleansing their home with protective symbols, individuals who engage in these practices are actively participating in their own spiritual protection and growth. The act of performing these rituals becomes a way to reclaim agency in a world that often feels unpredictable and out of control. Furthermore, these ancient rituals serve as a tool for community and connection. Many people now gather in virtual spaces to perform moon rituals, participate in collective prayers, or engage in group meditations. The rise of online spiritual communities has allowed individuals to connect with others who share similar spiritual practices and intentions. These digital spaces provide a sense of solidarity and support as people come together to work toward common goals of protection, healing, and empowerment. The digital age has made these ancient practices accessible to people across the globe, transcending geographical boundaries and cultural barriers to create a global community of spiritual seekers. As these practices continue to evolve and adapt to modern life, it is clear that they offer more than just protection from external forces. They provide a path to inner peace, emotional healing, and self-empowerment. The act of performing these rituals, whether in solitude or with a community, allows individuals to reconnect with their spiritual roots, tap into ancient wisdom, and protect their energy in a world that often feels overwhelming. The integration of these practices into daily life has become a form of personal transformation, helping individuals cultivate clarity, resilience, and balance in an increasingly chaotic world. Looking ahead, we will explore how these ancient spiritual practices are likely to evolve as society continues to change. In a world where technology and spiritual needs are intertwined, the future of these rituals will depend on how they adapt to the modern world while maintaining their ancient roots. Will these practices continue to thrive, or will they be further altered by the growing demand for instant spiritual solutions? As spiritual seekers turn to technology to deepen their connection to the sacred, the question remains, how will these practices evolve and endure in a world that is increasingly digital, fast-paced, and interconnected? In a world dominated by technology, scientific progress, and the rise of secularism, it may seem surprising that ancient spiritual practices, particularly those rooted in spiritual protection, continue to resonate with so many people today. As we've evolved, embracing rational thought and empirical evidence, why do these ancient rituals, particularly those performed at night to protect the soul, remain relevant? Despite the rapid pace of modern life and the growing emphasis on materialism, these practices endure. They are not only surviving, they are thriving. But what is it about these ancient traditions that makes them so enduring, even in an age where skepticism reigns and many turn to science for answers? To understand why these ancient practices still hold power, we must look at them through multiple lenses: psychological, cultural, and philosophical. At their core, these rituals are about the human need for meaning and protection in a world that often feels unpredictable and uncontrollable. Whether in the form of full moon rituals, nightly prayers, or the creation of spiritual boundaries, these practices speak to a deep-seated desire to feel secure, not just physically, but spiritually and emotionally. In a time when the material world often offers few answers to existential questions, these ancient rituals provide a framework for individuals to navigate their deepest fears and uncertainties. Psychologically, the enduring appeal of these spiritual practices is rooted in their ability to address human vulnerabilities that modern society often overlooks. While science and technology can offer solutions to tangible problems, diseases, physical injuries, technological advancements, they are less equipped to tackle the emotional, psychological, and existential concerns that many people face. Modern life can be isolating, and the constant bombardment of information, stress, and distractions often leaves little room for introspection or spiritual connection. In this context, ancient rituals provide emotional comfort and a sense of control. They offer a structured way to deal with life's challenges, including the existential fear of the unknown, the fear of death, and the emotional wounds left by personal trauma. Ancient spiritual practices are inherently tied to the mysteries of life, the cycles of nature, the movement of celestial bodies, the rhythms of the seasons, and the transition from life to death. These mysteries are universal and timeless, and they speak to something deep within the human experience. In a world that increasingly prioritizes the rational and the quantifiable, there is still a powerful pull toward the mysterious, the unknown, and the ineffable. The rituals that people turn to for spiritual protection are not just about warding off negative energies or supernatural forces. They are also about participating in something larger than oneself, something that transcends the ordinary and taps into a universal spiritual current that has existed for millennia. In this sense, these rituals offer a form of existential comfort. They allow individuals to feel a sense of connection to something greater, whether it's the divine, the universe, or the collective consciousness of humanity. This connection offers a sense of meaning and purpose in a world that can often feel chaotic and fragmented. Whether performed alone or in community, these rituals provide a space for personal reflection, healing, and empowerment. They offer individuals a chance to confront their fears, release emotional burdens, and cultivate inner peace, something that modern medicine or technology cannot always provide. But then, furthermore, these ancient practices offer a sense of control in a world that often feels uncontrollable. The chaos of modern life, political instability, economic uncertainty, climate change, and global pandemics can leave people feeling vulnerable and powerless. In these times, rituals provide a tool for individuals to regain a sense of agency and autonomy over their lives. Spiritual protection rituals, in particular, allow individuals to carve out sacred spaces where they can protect their energy, set intentions, and manifest positive change. By engaging in these practices, people assert control over their spiritual and emotional worlds, taking responsibility for their own well-being. At a cultural level, these practices have endured because they speak to a shared human experience. Across cultures and religions, The act of seeking spiritual protection and communion with higher forces is a common thread. The specific rituals may vary. Some involve chanting, others require sacred objects, while others may include offerings or prayers. But at their core, they are all about safeguarding the soul and creating a sense of balance between the physical and spiritual realms. This universal desire for spiritual protection is rooted in the deep-seated human need to feel secure in the face of life's uncertainties. It is a response to the primal fear of the unknown, of forces beyond our control, and of the fragility of human existence. Philosophically, the endurance of these rituals can also be seen as a resistance to the overwhelming influence of rationalism. While science and technology have provided immense benefits, they have also led to the disconnection from nature, spirituality, and the mysteries of life that have been integral to human experience for millennia. In a world that values knowledge over wisdom, the rise of ancient spiritual practices is a reminder that not all things can be explained or understood through logic alone. These rituals invite people to step beyond the limits of reason and engage with the ineffable, a realm of experience that is beyond the material and scientific. The modern resurgence of ancient spiritual practices is also tied to a growing desire for authentic experiences in an increasingly digital and superficial world. As people spend more time online, engaging in virtual interactions, there is a yearning for something real, tangible, and meaningful. Spiritual rituals provide a pathway to this authenticity, offering individuals a chance to connect with themselves, their ancestors, and the natural world in a way that transcends the digital realm. In a world where virtual experiences often replace real ones, these ancient rituals create opportunities for genuine connection and personal transformation. Despite the rise of skepticism and scientific reasoning, ancient spiritual practices remain powerful because they tap into the deepest aspects of the human experience. They address fundamental needs, protection, healing, meaning, and connection that continue to resonate in a modern world that often overlooks or dismisses these aspects of life. Whether through nightly protection prayers, full moon rituals, or the creation of spiritual boundaries, these practices offer more than just spiritual defense. They provide a way for individuals to navigate the complexities of modern existence, offering a path toward inner peace, empowerment, and connection to something greater than themselves. As we move forward, we will explore how these ancient practices will continue to evolve in the coming years. Will they remain sacred, protected, and preserved for those who seek them out? Or will they be reshaped to fit the demands of a rapidly changing world? How will these rituals adapt to new spiritual and cultural needs while maintaining their ancient roots? The future of these spiritual practices is intertwined with the growing desire for personal empowerment and spiritual connection. In the next section, we'll delve into how they will evolve in the digital age and beyond. As society continues to evolve and change, the question arises, can ancient spiritual practices, particularly those centered around protection and spiritual rituals, survive and thrive in the modern world? While the essence of these rituals, protection, connection, and spiritual empowerment, remains timeless, the way they are practiced and understood is inevitably evolving. For these ancient traditions to remain relevant and accessible to future generations, they must adapt to meet the challenges of a fast-paced, technology-driven world while preserving their core teachings. Modern spiritual seekers are already taking steps to adapt these practices, blending ancient wisdom with contemporary tools and ideas. The rise of virtual platforms, online communities, and digital tools is transforming how spiritual rituals are shared and practiced. One notable adaptation is the movement of ancient rituals, like moon ceremonies and protection rituals, from physical spaces into virtual ones. With the advent of live-streamed events, online workshops, and virtual moon circles, spiritual leaders and practitioners can now reach a global audience, making these powerful ceremonies accessible to a more diverse range of people. This shift not only expands the reach of these practices, but also democratizes them, allowing individuals who may not have access to in-person spiritual communities to engage with ancient rituals from the comfort of their own homes. The digital realm has opened up new avenues for connection, and modern spiritual leaders are utilizing it to ensure that the core teachings of these ancient practices are preserved and accessible. Virtual spaces allow for real-time participation in rituals like full moon ceremonies, where individuals from all over the world can join in synchrony to perform rituals designed for spiritual healing, protection, and empowerment. These online spaces foster a sense of community and belonging, which is essential in today's increasingly isolated and disconnected world. For many, being part of an online spiritual circle provides a sense of connection to others who share similar values, creating a digital community that transcends physical distance. Beyond virtual spaces, modern technology is being integrated into these spiritual practices in a way that enhances and complements their traditional forms. Apps, for example, are being developed to help individuals track moon phases, set intentions, and participate in guided rituals. These tools provide users with practical ways to engage with spiritual protection rituals daily, helping them to integrate these ancient practices into their busy lives. Meditation apps, online ritual guides, and even digital journals that track spiritual progress are all ways that modern technology is amplifying the reach and impact of ancient spiritual practices. In addition to tools that make rituals more accessible, technology is also being used to expand the knowledge base of these practices. Online forums, social media platforms, and digital archives offer spaces for people to share their experiences, ask questions, and learn from others. These platforms allow spiritual seekers to connect with a global network of practitioners, exchange wisdom, and collaborate in their spiritual journeys. This sharing of knowledge, once limited to physical communities or secret societies, is now thriving in digital spaces where individuals from all backgrounds can learn and grow together. Another crucial adaptation is the incorporation of contemporary concepts, such as mental health and personal empowerment, into ancient spiritual practices. As modern society grapples with an increasingly complex set of emotional and psychological challenges, anxiety, depression, burnout, and trauma, many ancient rituals are being reframed to address these concerns. Protection rituals, once performed to guard against malevolent spirits, are now also seen as tools for shielding oneself from the negative emotional energy of others, from stress, and from overwhelming societal pressures. Full moon rituals, which once focused on cleansing spiritual energy, are now often used to release emotional baggage and to address mental health struggles. In this sense, these rituals are evolving to meet the needs of modern individuals who seek to heal from trauma, restore emotional balance, and find protection from the pressures of a fast-paced world. The need for spiritual protection in the 21st century is more pressing than ever. With the rise of digital distractions, information overload, and the disconnection that often comes with living in an increasingly globalized yet isolated world, individuals are seeking ways to ground themselves spiritually. The rituals of protection, whether through nightly prayers, energy shielding, or moon rituals, offer a counterbalance to the chaos and uncertainty that many people face in their daily lives. These practices allow individuals to reclaim their power, set boundaries, and restore a sense of inner peace in a world that often feels out of control. The adaptation of ancient rituals for the future is also about making these practices meaningful in the context of today's challenges. As our understanding of personal empowerment grows, so too does the recognition of how ancient rituals can serve not only as spiritual tools, but also as psychological and emotional resources. Modern practitioners are looking to these ancient teachings to address not only their spiritual needs, but also their emotional and mental well-being. The rituals that were once performed to protect individuals from external, supernatural threats are now equally valuable in protecting one's inner world from negative thought patterns, emotional turbulence, and the stress of modern life. As these practices evolve, it's clear that they will continue to provide individuals with the tools they need to navigate the complexities of modern existence. The future of spiritual protection rituals lies in their ability to adapt without losing their essence, to maintain their core teachings while integrating the needs and values of modern life. Whether through virtual ceremonies, personalized apps, or the blending of ancient wisdom with contemporary psychology, these rituals will continue to evolve, ensuring that they remain relevant and powerful in the years to come. In the next section, We will explore how the ongoing relevance of these practices speaks to the deeper spiritual and emotional needs of humanity today. Why does the demand for spiritual protection remain so strong, even as the world becomes more technologically advanced? What does this tell us about the state of human consciousness and the continued need for connection, meaning, and protection in a rapidly changing world? The future of these practices is bound to evolve, but their importance to humanity's spiritual well-being remains as vital as ever. In a world that values progress, technology, and rational thought, it may seem odd that spiritual protection rituals, practices rooted in ancient traditions, still hold such relevance today. After all, modern society has given us unprecedented advancements in science and technology, offering solutions to physical ailments, mental health concerns, and global challenges. Yet, despite these advancements, the need for spiritual protection, the desire for emotional safety, connection, and a sense of transcendence has only grown stronger. Why, in an age dominated by logic and reason, does the longing for spiritual security remain so essential? The answer lies in the complex emotional and psychological landscape of the 21st century. Despite the comforts offered by modern conveniences, many people feel increasingly disconnected, vulnerable, and overwhelmed. The rapid pace of life, the constant bombardment of information, and the never-ending demands of the digital world have left individuals grappling with feelings of isolation, anxiety, and existential uncertainty. Modern society, with all its technological marvels, has not been able to fill the deep human need for meaning, community, and protection from the unseen forces that often feel beyond our control. It is here that spiritual protection rituals find their place, offering a sense of stability and grounding in a world that often feels chaotic. Spiritual protection, once focused on guarding the soul from supernatural threats, has evolved into something broader and more integral to modern life. Today, these rituals serve not only to protect individuals from external forces, but also to create emotional and psychological boundaries. In a world where boundaries are often blurred by the demands of work, relationships, and constant connectivity, people turn to these ancient practices as a way to reclaim their sense of self. Night rituals, such as full moon ceremonies or nightly prayers, provide a sacred space where individuals can clear their minds, release emotional burdens, and protect their energy from the negativity of the outside world. These practices offer emotional safety, a retreat from the stresses of modern life, and a way to restore inner peace. At the core of this ongoing need for spiritual protection is the human desire for belonging and connection. In a world where loneliness and isolation are increasingly common, our rituals that create a sense of community, whether physical or virtual, offer profound comfort. Spiritual protection ceremonies, often performed in groups or online circles, create a shared space for individuals to connect with others who seek the same sense of security, healing, and spiritual growth. The act of participating in a ritual, whether it's a moon circle, a group meditation, or a solitary prayer, fosters a sense of connection not only with others, but with something greater than oneself. This connection is essential in a world where many people feel adrift, disconnected from their roots, their communities, and their own inner selves. Furthermore, these rituals offer a form of transcendence that modern life often fails to provide. In the midst of our material world, where tangible solutions to physical problems dominate our attention, the longing for a connection to the divine, the universe, or the deeper mysteries of existence remains a fundamental human need. Spiritual protection rituals tap into this desire for transcendence, offering individuals a way to connect with something beyond the mundane. Whether it's invoking the power of the moon, communing with ancestors, or invoking protective spirits, these rituals allow people to engage with a spiritual dimension that provides meaning, purpose, and direction in an often confusing and uncertain world. The rise of mental health issues, particularly anxiety and depression, is another key reason why spiritual protection rituals are so crucial today. While modern psychology and psychiatry have made significant strides in understanding and treating mental health conditions, they often fail to address the deeper existential questions that many individuals face. Spiritual protection rituals help individuals navigate these psychological complexities by offering them tools for emotional healing, stress reduction, and self-empowerment. By engaging in practices that protect the mind and spirit, such as nightly protection prayers, energy cleansing rituals, or moon ceremonies, people can build resilience, cope with trauma, and create a sense of control in their lives. These practices allow individuals to step back from the pressures of modern life, process their emotions, and restore their sense of self-worth. In many ways, the need for spiritual protection today mirrors the ancient desire for safety from the unknown. Just as our ancestors looked to rituals to protect them from dark spirits and external threats, modern individuals turn to these practices to shield themselves from the intangible forces that shape their emotional and mental landscapes. The unseen forces of modern life, stress, anxiety, negative energy, and emotional turmoil, require their own form of protection. Spiritual protection rituals offer a framework through which individuals can confront these forces, heal from emotional wounds, and maintain balance in a world that often feels overwhelming. Ultimately, the continued relevance of these ancient rituals is a testament to the resilience of human spirituality. Even in the face of scientific progress and technological innovation, the need for meaning, connection, and protection remains as strong as ever. These rituals offer a pathway to inner peace, empowerment, and emotional security, providing individuals with the tools they need to navigate the complexities of modern existence. In an increasingly secular world, spiritual protection remains a powerful force, helping people reclaim their sense of self, heal from emotional wounds, and connect with something larger than themselves. As we look ahead to the future of spiritual practices, it's clear that these rituals will continue to evolve to meet the changing needs of society. In a world where technology and spirituality are increasingly intertwined, these practices will adapt to address the challenges of an ever-changing world. Yet, despite these changes, the core need for spiritual protection will remain, offering individuals a way to navigate the complexities of modern life while connecting with the deeper, timeless forces that have always guided humanity. In the next chapter, we will reflect on how the evolution of these practices speaks to the ongoing search for meaning in the 21st century, looking forward to the future of spiritual practices in an increasingly interconnected world. The search for spiritual protection is as old as humanity itself. From the earliest civilizations to modern times, humans have sought ways to shield themselves from unseen forces, dark energies, and existential threats. This desire for security, protection, and defense against the unknown transcends cultures and eras, manifesting in diverse spiritual rituals, from the ancient protection rites of Egyptian priests to the full moon ceremonies of modern-day witches. Despite advancements in science, technology, and rational thought, this fundamental human need remains unshaken, suggesting that the drive for spiritual protection is not simply a relic of superstition, but a deeply ingrained psychological and emotional need that cuts across time and culture. At the core of this universal desire for spiritual security is a primal fear, fear of death, fear of the unknown, and fear of the intangible forces that seem to govern the universe. Throughout history, human beings have confronted the mysteries of existence, grappling with questions about life, death, and the nature of the cosmos. These questions often lead to anxiety, existential dread, and a deep sense of vulnerability in the face of forces beyond our control. Spiritual protection rituals offer a way to confront these fears, providing a framework to shield the self from both tangible and intangible threats. They are an acknowledgement of the unknown, a way to face the existential mysteries that plague the human condition, and an attempt to regain some semblance of control over our lives. The fear of death is perhaps the most universal and profound fear that underpins the need for spiritual protection. Across cultures, death is not just the physical end of life, but a spiritual transition that is often perceived as fraught with danger. The ancient Egyptians, for example, performed elaborate funerary rituals to protect the soul of the deceased as it journeyed through the afterlife. Similarly, in other ancient cultures, rituals were designed to safeguard the living from malevolent spirits and to ensure a safe passage for the dead. These protective rites often involved offerings, prayers, and the invocation of protective deities or spirits. The modern need for spiritual protection while perhaps not always tied directly to death itself, still arises from the same fear of the unknown, fear of what happens after death, fear of what lurks in the unseen realms of existence. In contemporary society, where scientific understanding has largely supplanted supernatural beliefs, the desire for spiritual protection remains. It is not necessarily the fear of the afterlife that motivates individuals today, but a deeper, more existential fear, the fear of not having control over one's life or emotional well-being. In a world that often feels overwhelming, driven by the fast pace of modern life, constant technological distractions, and the complexities of interpersonal relationships, spiritual protection rituals offer individuals a way to restore balance and control. They provide a form of emotional and spiritual fortification in a world that can feel unpredictable and chaotic. Whether through nightly prayers, meditation, or protection rituals, these practices allow individuals to reclaim a sense of agency in an uncertain world. The need for protection is also deeply tied to the fear of spiritual harm. In many cultures, spiritual protection rituals were used to safeguard individuals from curses, malevolent spirits, and negative energies that could influence or disrupt their lives. In modern times, while these threats may not be as tangible or widely accepted, the underlying fear persists. Many individuals today still feel vulnerable to negative forces, not necessarily in the supernatural sense, but in the emotional and psychological sense. The rise of mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, and burnout, has created a new landscape in which spiritual protection rituals play a crucial role. They provide a means of shielding oneself from the draining effects of stress, negative emotions, and toxic relationships. These rituals, whether they are practiced alone or in community, serve as a way to restore emotional clarity, protect one's energy, and create boundaries in an increasingly demanding world. The power of spiritual protection rituals lies not only in their ability to shield individuals from external threats, but also in their capacity to empower the practitioner. Engaging in these practices allows individuals to take an active role in their spiritual and emotional well-being. In a world where so much is beyond our control, these rituals offer a sense of autonomy and self-determination. By performing protection ceremonies, individuals are not passive recipients of protection. They are actively engaging in the creation of a safe and sacred space. Whether it's through chanting, prayer, meditation, or the use of symbolic tools like crystals or protective amulets, these rituals serve as acts of empowerment. They remind individuals that they have the ability to influence their own lives, set boundaries, and protect themselves from harm, both physical and spiritual. In this sense, the need for spiritual protection is not just about shielding oneself from external threats. It is also about reclaiming one's personal power. In a world where many individuals feel overwhelmed or helpless, these rituals offer a way to restore balance and center the self. They provide a moment of stillness and reflection in a world that is constantly moving. The act of performing a spiritual protection ritual is a reminder that, despite the chaos of modern life, there is still power in stillness, in ritual, and in the connection to something greater than oneself. The universal desire for spiritual protection also speaks to the human longing for meaning and purpose. In a world where material wealth and technological progress often take precedence over spiritual fulfillment, these rituals offer a pathway to deeper meaning. They provide a way to connect with something larger than the self, whether that's the natural world, the divine, or the collective energy of humanity. These practices invite individuals to step outside the mundane and engage with the mysteries of existence. In doing so, they provide not just protection, but also a sense of belonging to something greater than one's individual experience. This universal desire for spiritual security transcends cultures, beliefs, and eras. From the ancient rituals of the Egyptians to the modern-day practices of neo-pagans and spiritual seekers, the need for protection from the unseen forces of the world is a fundamental aspect of the human experience. Whether rooted in fear of the unknown, the fear of death, or the need for empowerment, these rituals provide individuals with a sense of safety, clarity, and connection. As we continue to explore the relevance of spiritual protection in today's world, we will look at how these rituals not only serve to shield individuals from external threats, but also help them navigate the existential questions that are central to the human experience. In the next section, we will examine how these ancient practices can provide meaning and guidance in modern life. How do they help people make sense of their existence, their place in the world, and their connection to the greater mysteries of the universe? Spiritual protection rituals, while often seen as a defense against dark forces or negative energies, serve a much deeper and more profound purpose in human life. Across cultures and throughout history, these rituals have not only provided a shield against external threats, but also acted as a guide for individuals navigating the most fundamental questions of existence. Who are we? Why are we here? What happens after we die? In this sense, spiritual protection is not merely a response to fear, but a method of self-discovery, a tool for exploring the deeper mysteries of the universe, and a quest for personal meaning. Ancient night ceremonies, which have long been performed to protect the soul, were often as much about seeking answers as they were about defending against external dangers. Night rituals, in particular, have held a special place in this search for meaning. The night has always symbolized both danger and opportunity, an opening to the unseen world, where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual realms are believed to thin. It is during the night that many cultures believe the soul is most vulnerable, and yet it is also during this time that individuals are offered the opportunity to connect with higher realms of consciousness and the divine. These rituals, often performed in solitude or small, sacred groups, provided a moment of reflection, a space to confront the unknown, and a way to navigate the uncertainties of life. The act of engaging in these ceremonies was, in itself, a method of exploring existence, finding clarity in the face of confusion, and seeking answers to life's most profound questions. In ancient times, spiritual practices were a way to establish a relationship with the divine, to understand one's place in the cosmos, and to find protection from the uncertainties of life. They were tools not just for survival, but for exploration of the soul's purpose and the mysteries of the universe. These rituals were not limited to protecting the body from evil spirits. They also offered a means to connect with the divine forces that were believed to govern existence. In this sense, the practice of spiritual protection became a path of self-awareness and self-realization. The night ceremonies, with their symbolic gestures and sacred actions, were a way for individuals to step outside the mundane world and into a space where they could seek answers, reflect on their lives, and align themselves with a higher purpose. Today, modern spiritual seekers use these same ancient rituals in much the same way. While the specific customs and practices may have evolved over time, the core intent remains unchanged: to explore the mysteries of existence, to protect the soul from negative influences, and to seek deeper meaning. In a world that often seems chaotic and unpredictable, these rituals provide a way to find inner clarity and peace. Just as ancient people turned to rituals to understand the meaning of life and death, modern seekers turn to spiritual protection practices to find a sense of purpose, guidance, and connection to something larger than themselves. Modern spiritual seekers, in particular, are increasingly turning to these ancient practices to answer life's existential questions. Amid the distractions of modern life and the pressures of societal expectations, the search for meaning can often feel elusive. People are looking for ways to reconnect with themselves, with the divine, and with the larger forces of the universe. Spiritual protection rituals, whether performed under the light of the full moon, in private meditation, or as part of a group ceremony, have become tools for this very search. For many, these rituals offer more than just a way to protect the soul from external threats. They provide a pathway to self-discovery and understanding. They create a space for individuals to contemplate their purpose, reflect on their personal journeys, and tap into a deeper sense of meaning. Through rituals such as full moon ceremonies, protective prayers, or energy cleansing practices, modern practitioners engage in acts of spiritual introspection, seeking clarity about their place in the world and their relationship to the divine. These practices offer a way to address not only external challenges, but also the inner uncertainties and existential questions that many face. The rituals allow for a moment of stillness, a time to tune into one's inner voice, and an opportunity to connect with higher realms of consciousness that transcend the limitations of daily life. In this way, spiritual protection becomes part of a larger journey of self-exploration, self-empowerment, and understanding. In the modern context, spiritual protection rituals are also about reclaiming a sense of control in a world that often feels out of control. With the rapid pace of technological advancements, constant information overload, and the complexities of modern life, many individuals find themselves feeling disconnected from their inner selves. Spiritual practices provide an antidote to this disconnection, offering a way to slow down, reflect, and reconnect with one's core beliefs and values. By performing these rituals, individuals can reaffirm their sense of purpose, set intentions for their lives, and navigate the existential challenges they face. These rituals act as anchors, providing stability and meaning in a world that often feels fragmented. What is striking about the modern use of these ancient practices is their adaptability. While the world has changed drastically in terms of technology, culture, and society, the questions that drive human existence have remained remarkably consistent. The desire for spiritual protection, for connection to something greater than oneself, and for clarity in the face of uncertainty is as powerful today as it was in ancient times. Whether through online moon circles, private meditations, or communal rituals, modern spiritual seekers are adapting these ancient practices to their own lives in a way that helps them understand their place in the universe, find healing from personal struggles, and connect with their spiritual paths. Spiritual protection rituals, in this sense, are not just about defense. They are about exploration and discovery. They are not just a way to shield oneself from external threats, but a way to uncover deeper truths about the nature of life, death, and the universe. For modern spiritual seekers, these practices offer a means to connect with something timeless, something that transcends the transient nature of modern life. In a world that can often feel fragmented and uncertain, these rituals provide a way to find stability, purpose, and clarity. They offer individuals the opportunity to align themselves with the larger forces that govern existence, and in doing so, discover the deeper meaning that has eluded so many in the hustle of modern life. As we move forward, we will explore how the search for meaning continues to evolve in the modern world, and how these ancient practices are reshaping the spiritual landscape. How do people today use these rituals not only for protection, but as a guide to understanding themselves and their place in the cosmos? In the next section, we will delve deeper into the role of modern society in shaping our search for spiritual security and meaning, and how these ancient rituals are being reinterpreted to meet contemporary spiritual needs. In today's rapidly evolving world, where technological advancements and secular ideologies dominate, many individuals are experiencing a profound sense of spiritual disconnection. The pace of modern life, combined with the widespread influence of materialism, has led countless people to feel a loss of meaning, a sense of emptiness that modern solutions, whether they be technological or scientific, cannot seem to fill. The once strong bonds to religious traditions, community rituals, and a sense of the sacred have weakened, leaving a void that many struggle to understand or address. For many, this disconnection has sparked an intense search for something more, something greater than the material world, leading them back to ancient spiritual practices that provide a sense of connection, purpose, and protection. The modern crisis of disconnection is deeply tied to the decline of traditional religious systems. As societies become more secular, particularly in Western cultures, conventional faiths that once provided clear answers to life's existential questions no longer resonate as strongly as they once did. People are no longer content to accept doctrines or rituals without question, and many have turned away from established religious practices in search of something that feels more personal, authentic, and meaningful. This shift has given rise to a new wave of spiritual seekers, individuals looking for alternative forms of spirituality that provide not just philosophical answers, but also a sense of connection to something sacred, transcendent, and greater than themselves. As people move further from traditional religious structures, they are increasingly turning to ancient spiritual practices as a way to restore a sense of the sacred in their lives. These practices, often rooted in the cycles of nature, the divine, and the unseen forces of the universe, offer a profound sense of connection to the world around us. Spiritual protection rituals, once primarily used to shield individuals from supernatural threats or malevolent spirits, are now being rediscovered as powerful tools to reconnect with the sacred. Whether it's performing a full moon ritual, setting protective intentions before bed, or cleansing one's space with sacred herbs, these rituals are providing modern spiritual seekers with a way to engage with something larger, something that is timeless and transcendent. In a world that often feels fragmented and chaotic, these ancient practices offer an opportunity to step back from the noise and reconnect with a deeper, more meaningful reality. The search for spiritual protection in a secular world is not just about shielding oneself from external dangers, but also about protecting the inner world. In an age where mental health issues are on the rise and existential anxiety is a constant undercurrent in people's lives, these rituals provide a way to safeguard the mind and spirit from the overwhelming stress and negativity that often pervade modern existence. As society becomes more fragmented, with individuals increasingly isolated from community and tradition, the need for spiritual protection and emotional support has become more pressing. These rituals offer a safe space, a moment of reflection, grounding, and protection in an otherwise chaotic world. In particular, the growing rise of spiritual seekers in Western cultures is a direct response to the growing disconnect from traditional religious systems. Many people who no longer identify with organized religion are seeking alternative spiritual paths that align more closely with their personal beliefs and experiences. These modern seekers are drawn to spiritual practices that offer both empowerment and protection, offering rituals that feel accessible and meaningful without the dogma often associated with mainstream religions. They are turning to the sacred, the mystical, and the esoteric as a means of restoring what has been lost in the secular world. Connection to the divine, to the earth, and to the soul. These ancient spiritual practices, with their deep ties to the natural world and the unseen forces that govern existence, offer a way to restore a sense of sacredness to life. The rituals provide a framework for individuals to reconnect with the mysteries of existence and address the existential questions that modern life often leaves unanswered. By engaging in practices that acknowledge the cycles of nature, the rhythms of the cosmos, and the presence of spiritual forces, people are able to regain a sense of wonder, awe, and reverence that modern life often diminishes. The full moon, the changing seasons, and the sacredness of the night. These elements of the natural world serve as powerful reminders that there is still mystery and meaning to be found in life. As the crisis of disconnection deepens, more individuals are turning to these practices not only for spiritual protection, but as a way to answer the call for purpose and meaning. These rituals offer a sense of agency and control in a world that can feel overwhelming. Spiritual protection ceremonies, once believed to ward off evil spirits, are now serving as a means to guard against the negative energies of modern life: stress, emotional exhaustion, toxic relationships, and existential dread. These practices are about more than just shielding the self from external harm. They are about actively engaging in the creation of a meaningful, empowered, and sacred life. In performing these rituals, people are asserting their right to protect and nurture their souls in a world that often demands their constant attention, leaving little room for introspection and spiritual growth. The rediscovery of these ancient practices is a way for individuals to reclaim what has been lost in the secular material world. By returning to rituals that connect them with nature, the divine, and their own inner truths, modern spiritual seekers are able to reintegrate the sacred into their lives. This reclamation of the sacred is not just about protecting the soul, it is also about reestablishing a deeper connection to the universe, to the mysteries of existence, and to one's true self. In doing so, individuals are able to find peace, purpose, and spiritual security in a world that often leaves them feeling disconnected and adrift. In the next section, we will reflect on how these ancient practices continue to evolve, adapting to meet the spiritual needs of modern society while still maintaining their core teachings. How can these rituals serve as a bridge between the past and the future, ensuring that the timeless quest for spiritual protection and meaning continues to thrive? We will explore how these practices can remain relevant, offering a profound sense of connection and purpose in an increasingly fragmented world. Throughout history, darkness has held a unique place in spiritual practices. Often seen as a source of fear, a time when evil forces lurk and the unknown threatens, it also possesses profound symbolism in the realm of spiritual protection. Darkness is not merely a physical absence of light, it is a powerful force, a symbol of the unconscious, transformation, and hidden wisdom. In many cultures, the night was believed to be a time when the boundary between the physical and spiritual realms was at its thinnest, creating an opening for communication with the divine, ancestors, or unseen forces. The night, with its inherent mystery, has long been associated with spiritual renewal, self-discovery, and the search for hidden truths. In the context of spiritual protection rituals, darkness is not just something to be feared or repelled. It is a space where individuals can confront the deepest aspects of their psyche, face their fears, and reclaim lost parts of themselves. Spiritual protection in the night is as much about inner growth and personal empowerment as it is about shielding oneself from external threats. Rather than simply chasing away the darkness, these ancient rituals invite practitioners to embrace it, to explore the unknown, tap into hidden strengths, and transform the energy of the night into a tool for spiritual renewal and protection. The significance of darkness in spiritual protection rituals is seen in its symbolic connection to the unconscious mind. Just as the night hides what is visible to the eye, the unconscious holds the truths and emotions that are hidden from conscious awareness. Darkness, therefore, represents both a space of concealment and a space of revelation. In the depths of the night, practitioners can go inward, accessing the hidden recesses of their minds and souls. This introspection is an integral part of spiritual protection, as it allows individuals to confront unresolved fears, repressed memories, and emotional wounds that may leave them vulnerable to negative influences. It is in the stillness of the night that clarity emerges, where hidden aspects of the self can be uncovered and healed. One of the most powerful aspects of night rituals is their focus on transformation. Darkness, in many spiritual traditions, is seen as a place of potential for change and renewal. The night is not just a period of waiting for the return of the sun, it is a sacred time of inner alchemy. In the same way that seeds are planted in the soil, unseen and nurtured until they bloom, the soul undergoes a process of growth and rebirth during the dark hours. Night rituals often involve symbolic acts of letting go, releasing negative energies, and recharging one's spirit. It is in this darkness that people may confront their deepest fears, face past trauma, and in doing so, reclaim their personal power. The darkness offers protection not just from external forces, but also from the internal chaos that can threaten one's sense of peace and stability. For example, in many ancient traditions, the darkness of the night was considered a time when the divine was most accessible. In Egypt, for instance, the night was sacred to the moon god Thoth, who governed wisdom, writing, and magic. His realm was the darkness, where knowledge and hidden truths could be revealed. Similarly, in Greek mythology, the underworld, often associated with darkness, was not only a place of death but also one of transformation and rebirth. The souls of the dead would pass through the dark realms, shedding their earthly attachments before moving on to the afterlife. These ancient practices reveal a deep understanding of darkness as a necessary component of spiritual evolution. Modern spiritual seekers, too, are rediscovering the power of the night in their protection rituals. Full moon ceremonies, which are traditionally performed at night, are often seen as a time for spiritual cleansing and releasing negative energy. However, these rituals are also an opportunity to embrace the mystery of the night, using the moon's illumination to explore the depths of the soul, confront hidden fears, and set intentions for personal transformation. The night, with its connection to the unconscious, is a powerful tool for self-exploration and healing. Through ritual, individuals can tap into this energy, seeking not just protection from external harm, but also spiritual renewal and growth. One of the key elements of these night rituals is the practice of embracing the darkness rather than fearing it. Many modern spiritual seekers are drawn to the concept of shadow work, a practice that involves confronting and integrating the repressed, often darker aspects of the self. This work, which is often done in the quiet of the night, encourages individuals to look at the parts of themselves they may have avoided, unhealed wounds, suppressed emotions, or hidden desires, and to bring them into the light of awareness. This process of integration is not about defeating the darkness, but about understanding and accepting it as a part of the whole. In this way, spiritual protection rituals at night become a means of balancing light and shadow, offering not just safety, but the wisdom that comes from embracing the full spectrum of the self. The power of the night, therefore, lies not just in its ability to shield from harm, but in its role as a transformative space. The darkness holds the potential for deep self-understanding and healing. Spiritual protection rituals performed during the night are a way to connect with the deeper, hidden parts of oneself, enabling individuals to emerge stronger, more centered, and more empowered. These rituals tap into the primal energies of the night, using its power to protect, renew, and transform. As we continue to explore the deeper mysteries of spiritual protection rituals, we will move into the next section, where we will uncover the hidden knowledge and esoteric teachings that have been passed down through the ages, knowledge that has been kept secret for centuries and holds the keys to even deeper spiritual empowerment and protection. The night, it seems, is not only a time for protection, but a doorway to the deeper mysteries of existence itself. For centuries, certain spiritual practices, particularly those related to protection rituals, have been shrouded in secrecy, passed down only to a select few who were deemed worthy of understanding their deeper meaning. These rituals, often reserved for initiates of secret societies or sacred lineages, were believed to contain not only the power to protect the soul, but also to catalyze profound spiritual awakening, personal transformation, and transcendence. While much of the wisdom embedded in these ancient practices has been lost to time, there are still remnants of these hidden teachings that, if uncovered, could reveal the ultimate purpose of spiritual protection, not merely to shield the individual from harm, but to awaken them to their true potential and the deeper mysteries of existence. Throughout history, many of these esoteric teachings were deliberately kept from the public eye. The knowledge contained within these rituals was thought to be too powerful, too sacred, or too dangerous to be shared with those who were not spiritually prepared. It was believed that the uninitiated, those without the proper understanding or discipline, might misuse or exploit these teachings, leading to negative consequences. Consequently, these rituals were passed down through secretive orders, protected by intricate symbols, chants, and meditative practices that only those who had undergone rigorous initiation could fully comprehend. One key element of these secret rituals was the use of sacred symbols. Throughout history, symbols have played an integral role in spiritual protection practices. These symbols, whether drawn, spoken, or used in physical objects, held deep, esoteric meanings that were said to carry powerful protective energies. For example, the pentagram, often associated with protection in modern witchcraft, has roots in ancient spiritual traditions. It was used as a symbol of balance, representing the connection between the elements and the human soul. In these secret rituals, the pentagram was believed to create an energetic shield, deflecting harmful forces and drawing down divine protection. Similarly, the ancient Egyptian Ankh symbolized eternal life and was believed to protect both the living and the dead. These sacred symbols were not simply decorative. They were imbued with spiritual power, serving as a gateway to higher realms of consciousness and protection from spiritual dangers. Chants and mantras also played a crucial role in these secret rituals. The sound of specific words, repeated in rhythm, was believed to unlock hidden energies and invoke spiritual forces. In many traditions, chants were used to activate protective barriers around individuals or spaces, allowing the practitioner to enter a state of heightened awareness and spiritual defense. These chants were often passed down orally, carefully guarded by the elders or spiritual leaders of the community. The knowledge of the right words, the correct pronunciation, and the proper timing was considered vital for the effectiveness of the protection ritual. For instance, in Tibetan Buddhism, the chanting of mantras such as Om Mani Padme Hum was believed to purify the mind and shield the practitioner from negative influences. In other cultures, such as ancient Greek or Roman traditions, invocations to specific gods or spirits were recited in sacred rituals to protect the soul and ensure the favor of the divine. Meditative practices also formed the foundation of these ancient protection rituals. These rituals were not only about warding off external threats, but were also a means of journeying inward, connecting with the deeper layers of the self, and awakening hidden spiritual powers. In many traditions, meditation was used as a tool to access higher states of consciousness, where the practitioner could communicate with divine beings or receive guidance from ancestral spirits. These practices often involve guided visualizations, where the practitioner would imagine themselves surrounded by protective light or placed within a sacred, shielded space. The act of visualization itself was seen as a powerful protective mechanism, creating an energetic barrier that could not only repel external dangers, but also protect the soul from emotional or psychological harm. For example, in the ancient Egyptian mystery schools, initiates underwent meditative rituals to access their inner spiritual knowledge. These meditations, combined with ritual symbolism, were believed to allow the initiate to transcend the physical realm and receive wisdom directly from the gods. The practice of inner vision and spiritual awakening was at the core of the Egyptian tradition, and it was through these practices that many believed they could connect to the highest divine powers. Similarly, in Kabbalistic traditions, the act of meditation on divine names and sacred symbols was thought to open a gateway to the protection and guidance of angels or other spiritual entities. These meditative practices, often combined with sacred breathing techniques, allowed the practitioner to transcend the ego and align with divine energy, thus providing protection from spiritual ritual harm and unlocking higher wisdom. The deeper purpose of these secret rituals goes beyond mere protection. They are about spiritual growth and self-empowerment. The act of engaging in these ancient practices was meant to awaken latent spiritual abilities and align the individual with the cosmic forces of the universe. The protection these rituals offered was not only a shield against external forces, but also a means of personal transformation. By confronting the darkness, whether through meditation, chant, or symbolism, the practitioner was believed to undergo a process of spiritual alchemy, transforming base energies into higher, more refined states of being. This process, in turn, made the individual more attuned to divine wisdom and more capable of understanding the mysteries of life and death, light and dark. The secrets that have been kept hidden for centuries are not merely about safeguarding the body or the soul from malevolent forces. They are about awakening to a higher consciousness, recognizing one's divine potential, and understanding one's place in the vast, mysterious cosmos. Spiritual protection rituals, when fully understood and practiced with the right intent, can lead to a deeper connection with the divine, a profound sense of inner peace, and the wisdom to navigate the complexities of existence. The mysteries contained within these rituals are not just meant to protect the soul, they are meant to transform it, elevating the practitioner to a higher state of spiritual awareness. As we move forward, we will delve into the future of these ancient practices. How can these hidden teachings continue to evolve in the modern world? What role will they play in the spiritual awakening of future generations? The next section will explore how these ancient spiritual practices, with their hidden knowledge, can continue to guide and protect us in the face of modern challenges. As the world continues to evolve, becoming increasingly interconnected, globalized, and technologically advanced, ancient spiritual protection rituals are experiencing a resurgence. In a time when science, logic, and rationality dominate much of human thinking, these practices offer a deep, counterbalancing force, a connection to something timeless and transcendent. People today, overwhelmed by the complexities of modern life, are turning to ancient spiritual practices as a source of comfort, protection, and self-discovery. The question is, how will these rituals continue to evolve and shape the future? Can they adapt to modern challenges while preserving their core essence, providing spiritual security and personal growth in an ever-changing world? Despite the dominance of rational thought in the modern world, the rise of alternative spiritual practices in the digital age signals a powerful shift. The internet has opened up new ways of connecting with spiritual communities, allowing seekers to engage with ancient knowledge and rituals that were once restricted to select groups. The rapid growth of online platforms, social media, and digital communities has made it easier than ever to share, learn, and adapt spiritual practices from all corners of the world. This global exchange of ideas and practices will continue to shape the future of spiritual protection rituals, enabling these ancient traditions to evolve and reach a wider, more diverse audience. One of the key factors in the continued relevance of ancient spiritual protection rituals will be their ability to adapt to contemporary needs while staying true to their core teachings. Future generations may reinterpret these practices, blending them with modern wisdom to address the challenges of the 21st century. In a world increasingly concerned with mental health, emotional well-being, and self-empowerment, these rituals can offer powerful tools for personal growth and healing. The essence of protection rituals, creating boundaries, shielding from negative energies, and cultivating inner peace, remains just as relevant today as it was in ancient times. But now they can be framed within the context of modern life, providing not only spiritual protection, but also emotional and psychological support. The modern mystic, spiritual leader, or healer will play an important role in ensuring that these ancient practices are passed down and adapted for future generations. In a world where traditional religious structures are losing their grip, many spiritual leaders are looking to alternative paths to guide people toward a deeper understanding of themselves and their place in the universe. Spiritual leaders today are more likely to draw from a wide range of traditions, blending ancient wisdom with modern therapeutic techniques to create rituals that resonate with contemporary seekers. These leaders, both in person and through online platforms, will continue to offer the guidance needed to maintain the integrity of ancient spiritual protection rituals while ensuring that they remain accessible and relevant to those seeking personal and spiritual growth. One of the most significant changes in the way these ancient rituals are practiced is the rise of online spiritual communities. These digital spaces provide a platform for individuals to come together, share their experiences, and learn from each other. Through virtual circles, online workshops, and social media groups, spiritual seekers can participate in rituals, exchange ideas, and support each other's journeys. The sense of community and shared intention that was once limited to in-person gatherings can now be experienced on a global scale. Online spaces also allow individuals to explore ancient spiritual practices in the privacy of their own homes, offering a way to deepen their spiritual practices without the barriers that traditional physical communities sometimes impose. As these ancient practices evolve in the digital age, they will continue to be influenced by the growing interest in self-care, mindfulness, and personal empowerment. In many ways, the spiritual protection rituals of the future will be as much about self-awareness and self-healing as they are about external protection. The ability to create personal boundaries, protect one's energy, and cultivate inner peace is something that modern society desperately needs. And these rituals offer a potent antidote to the stress, anxiety, and emotional turmoil that so many people face. By reinterpreting these practices through a modern lens, spiritual seekers can gain the tools they need to navigate the complexities of life with greater resilience and clarity. However, in this process of adaptation, it is crucial that the core essence of these rituals is preserved. While the modern world may offer new tools and frameworks for spiritual growth, the underlying principles of spiritual protection rituals must remain intact. These practices have survived for centuries because they are deeply rooted in the human experience, the need for safety, connection, and transcendence. As we look to the future, it is essential that these rituals continue to honor their ancient origins, offering timeless wisdom and spiritual protection to those who seek it. The future of these rituals is also intertwined with the growing interest in the integration of spirituality in psychology. Many modern practitioners view spiritual protection not only as a way to shield themselves from negative forces, but also as a way to heal from past trauma, manage stress, and cultivate emotional well-being. In this context, spiritual protection rituals are evolving into powerful tools for self-discovery and healing, providing a framework for individuals to explore their inner worlds and make peace with their fears and insecurities. As society increasingly recognizes the importance of mental health, These practices will continue to serve as essential resources for those seeking balance, protection, and transformation. The intersection of ancient wisdom and modern technology creates a unique opportunity for the future of spiritual protection rituals. While technology may often be seen as a force that distances people from spirituality, it also provides the tools to share, preserve, and adapt these ancient practices on a global scale. The ability to access spiritual teachings online, participate in virtual rituals, and connect with like-minded individuals across the world offers an unprecedented opportunity for spiritual growth and connection. In a rapidly changing world, the lasting power of these ancient practices lies in their ability to evolve, maintaining their core wisdom while adapting to the needs of future generations. In conclusion, the legacy of ancient spiritual protection rituals will continue to guide and empower individuals as they navigate the challenges of modern life. By embracing the timeless wisdom of these practices and adapting them to contemporary needs, future generations will find new ways to connect with the sacred, protect their souls, and awaken to their true potential. These rituals, passed down through the ages, offer a bridge between the past and the future, providing a sense of continuity and protection in a world that is constantly changing. The future of spiritual protection lies in its ability to adapt, evolve, and remain a source of profound wisdom for those who seek it.